Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is James Redmont, and I've been a park ranger for 17 years. I work in the Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky, mostly around a place called Copperhead Ridge. It's wild country out there, steep hills covered in trees, old mining roads that don't go anywhere anymore, and fog that rolls in so thick you can't see 10 feet ahead. People think being a ranger is all about helping lost hikers and putting out campfires. But my job is different. I deal with the old coal mines. There are hundreds of them scattered through these mountains, most of them sealed up decades ago after the companies pulled out. My job is to make sure nobody falls down a shaft or gets hurt by old equipment. I grew up in these hills. My grandfather worked the mines back in the 1920 seconds, before everything went bad. He used to tell me stories when I was little. Stories about things that lived deep underground, things that weren't quite human anymore. He called them the hollow men. Said they were miners who went too deep and found something they shouldn't have. I never believed those stories. Granddad had breathed too much coal dust, and it made him see things. Or so I thought. The trouble started 3 weeks ago when some college kids went missing. They were from the university down in Lexington, geology students doing research on old mining sites. Smart kids, the kind who know how to stay safe in the woods. But they never came back to their camp. Their professor called it in on a Tuesday morning. I remember because it was the day the fog rolled in thick and stayed for a week straight. When I got to their campsite, everything looked normal at first. Tents still up, food still hanging from a tree to keep the bears away. But their equipment was gone, all their fancy tools for measuring rocks and soil. I found their gear 2 days later, about a mile from camp. It was piled up neat and tidy right in front of the old Copperhead mine entrance. That stopped me cold, because the Copperhead mine has been sealed since 1976. Concrete and steel, welded shut tight. No way anyone should be able to get inside. But there the equipment was, covered in this weird gray clay that didn't match anything I knew from these hills. The clay was cold to the touch, even though it was a warm October day. And it had this smell, like copper pennies mixed with something rotten. I called for backup and got Kate Morrison. She's been a ranger for 8 years, tough as nails and twice as smart. Kate took one look at that equipment and said the same thing I was thinking. Someone's been inside that mine. We walked around to check the entrance. The concrete seal was cracked down the middle, split wide enough for a person to squeeze through. But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. The cracks ran from the inside out. Something had broken through from underground. Kate shined her flashlight into the opening. The beam went down about 20 feet, then just disappeared into black. But I could hear something down there. A sound like wind, but too regular, too much like breathing. We need to call this in, I told her. Get a proper rescue team. But Kate was already checking her gear. Those kids might still be alive down there. How long do you think a rescue team will take to get here? 6 hours? 8? She was right, and we both knew it. The nearest town was 35 miles away, and half the roads were washed out from recent rain. If those students were hurt and trapped underground, we might be their only chance. I looked at that dark opening and thought about my grandfather's stories. About miners who went down and never came back up the same. About hollow men who stole souls in the deep places. But I also thought about 4 young people who might be dying while we stood there talking. All right, I said, but we do this by the book. Safety gear, rope, radio check every 15 minutes. Kate nodded and started unpacking her climbing equipment. What do you know about this mine? Opened in 1918, closed in 1924 after a cave-in killed 47 men. They never recovered most of the bodies. I pulled out the survey maps I always carried. Supposed to be 3 main tunnels going down about 200 feet, but the records are pretty sketchy. Why'd they seal it so tight? I folded up the maps and checked my headlamp. Officially, unstable ground, dangerous gases, the usual stuff. I paused, thinking about those old stories. Unofficially, local families used to leave food and flowers at the entrance. said it kept the hollow men sleeping. Kate gave me a look. You don't actually believe that stuff. No, I said, though I wasn't as sure as I sounded. But sometimes the old stories exist for a reason. We strapped on our gear and checked our radios one more time. The static was worse than usual, probably because of the fog. But we had rope and lights and enough common sense to turn back if things got too dangerous. At least, that's what I told myself as we squeezed through that crack and started down into the dark. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It hit us about 10 steps inside, that same copper and rot smell from the clay, but stronger, like old blood mixed with wet earth. Kate wrinkled her nose and pulled her shirt up over her mouth. Gas? She asked. I checked my meter. Air's clean, just smells like death. Our headlamps cut through the dark, showing rough stone walls and rusted minecart tracks. The tunnel was bigger than I expected, wide enough for 3 people to walk side by side. But something felt wrong about the proportions. According to my maps, this tunnel should have been much smaller. We followed the cart tracks deeper into the mine. Every few steps, I stopped to mark our path with chalk. Standard procedure, so we could find our way back. The temperature dropped as we went down, and soon I could see our breath in the beam of the flashlights. James, Kate said after we'd walked about 5 minutes, look at this. She was kneeling next to the tracks, pointing at something in the dirt. Footprints, but wrong somehow. The shape was human, but they were pressed too deep into the ground, like whoever made them weighed twice what they should. Could be the students, I said, but I didn't believe it. These prints were bigger than any college kid would make, and they had this strange drag mark behind the heel, like something was being pulled along the ground. We followed the tracks deeper. The tunnel branched off in several directions, but the footprints only went one way, straight down the main shaft. After another 10 minutes, we found the first piece of real evidence. It was a backpack, torn open and scattered across the tunnel floor. College textbooks, granola bars, water bottles, all of it covered in that gray clay. Kate picked up one of the books and read the name inside the cover. Sarah Chen, that's one of the missing students. I knelt down and examined the backpack. The fabric was shredded, but not by any animal I knew. The tears were too clean, too deliberate. Like something with very sharp fingers had gone through it piece by piece. Kate, we need to. A sound echoed up from deeper in the tunnel. It started low, like wind through a cave, then rose higher until it almost sounded like singing, but no human voice could make a sound like that. It was hollow and empty, like air being sucked through a broken pipe. We both froze, listening. The sound came again, closer this time, and with it came the distinct echo of footsteps. Not running, walking slowly, deliberately, like someone taking their time. Students, Kate whispered. I shook my head. Those footsteps sounded wrong. Too heavy, and with that same dragging sound we'd seen in the tracks. The singing stopped. For a long moment, there was perfect silence except for our breathing. Then a voice called out from the darkness ahead. Help, help me. It was young, scared, definitely human. Kate started forward immediately, but I grabbed her arm. Wait. Someone's hurt down there. I know, but listen. The voice came again, clearer this time. Help me. I'm lost. I can't find the way out. It sounded like a young woman, probably one of the students. But something about it made my skin crawl. Maybe it was the way the words echoed, like they were being spoken from inside a big, empty space. Or maybe it was how the voice never quite changed tone, never got more urgent or more relieved. Kate pulled away from my grip. We have to help. Just be careful. We moved forward slowly, following the cart tracks. The tunnel curved to the right, and our lights picked up something ahead. A figure standing in the middle of the passage, back turned to us, wearing what looked like hiking clothes. Sarah? Kate called out. Sarah Chen? The figure didn't move, didn't even seem to hear us. Kate walked faster, and I hurried to keep up. But as we got closer, something made me stop. The figure was too tall, and it was standing perfectly still, not shifting weight or breathing or doing any of the small movements people make without thinking. When our lights hit it full on, I could see why. It wasn't quite human anymore. The shape was right from behind. Head, shoulders, arms, legs, all where they should be. But the proportions were off, stretched out like someone had grabbed the person by the head and feet and pulled, and there was something wrong with the way it stood. too straight and too balanced. Kate, stop. She was only a few feet away when the thing turned around. I don't know how to describe what we saw. It had a human face, or what used to be one. A young woman with dark hair and college kid clothes, but her skin was gray like old concrete, and her eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, but the whole eye, like holes punched through her skull. And her chest was wrong. Where her ribs should be, there was just emptiness. A hollow space you could see right through, like someone had scooped out everything inside and left only the shell. The thing that used to be Sarah, Chen, smiled at us with too many teeth and opened its mouth. "Help me," it said in that same flat voice. "I'm lost." Kate stumbled backward into me, and we both nearly fell. The creature took a step forward, and I could hear something rattling inside its chest, like pebbles in an empty can. "Can't find the way out," it continued, taking another step. "Been walking for so long." I grabbed Kate's hand and we ran. Behind us, that hollow singing started up again, but now I could tell what it really was. It was laughter. Empty, echoing laughter that followed us up the tunnel like something hunting. We ran until our lungs burned and the singing faded behind us. When we finally stopped, we were back near the entrance, close enough to see gray daylight through the crack we'd squeezed through. Kate was shaking. "What was that thing?" I knew, but I didn't want to say it. Didn't want to admit that my grandfather's stories might be real. "I don't know. Someone's sick, maybe. Could be gas down there, making people hallucinate." "Gas doesn't make someone's chest disappear, James." Kate checked her radio. "We need to call this in. Get a real rescue team, maybe some kind of medical help." I tried my radio too, but got nothing but static. Dead zone. We'd have to go back to the truck. "Then let's go." But as we moved toward the entrance, we heard voices. Real voices this time. Young, scared, calling for help from somewhere deeper in the mine. Not that flat, empty sound the thing had made, but genuine human panic. "There are more of them down there," Kate said. "The other 3 students, they might still be normal." She was right. Whatever had happened to Sarah Chen, the others might still be okay. Might still be human enough to save. And if we left now to get help, they could be dead or transformed by the time we got back. "All right," I said. "But we do this smart. Stay together, stay near the main tunnel, and if we see any more of those things, we run." We went back into the mine, this time taking a different branch of the tunnel. The voices were coming from the left passage, and they sounded desperate. Real fear, real pain. Not like the hollow mockery we'd heard from the Sarah thing. This tunnel was smaller than the main shaft, with wooden support beams that looked ready to collapse. Our lights picked up more of those drag marks in the dirt, and along the walls, I started noticing something else. Scratches in the stone, not tool marks, but claw marks, like something with very sharp fingernails had been scraping at the rock. "Help! Someone, please help us." The voice was male this time, echoing from up ahead. We followed the sound around a bend and found them. 3 college kids, huddled together in what looked like an old storage chamber. They were alive, human, and terrified. 2 boys and a girl, all of them covered in that gray clay, but otherwise unharmed. "Thank God," one of them said when our lights hit them. We thought no one was coming. "We're park rangers," Kate said, kneeling down next to them. "Are you hurt? Can you walk?" The girl, blonde, maybe 20 years old, started crying. "We can't leave. We tried, but they won't let us. They keep bringing us back." "Who won't let you?" I asked, though I thought I knew. "Sarah," one of the boys whispered. She's not Sarah anymore." "None of them are." "None of who?" "The miners. The ones who died down here. They've been collecting us." Kate and I exchanged looks. "How long have you been down here?" 3 days. I think. Hard to tell time in the dark." The blonde girl wiped her eyes. "Sarah was the first to change. Something touched her in the deep tunnels, and after that, she started looking different. Gray skin, black eyes, and her chest. Empty." I finished. She nodded. "The thing is, she still talks like Sarah, still remembers being her. But she serves them now. The hollow men." A chill ran down my spine. "You've seen others?" "Dozens of them. They live in the deep parts of the mine, where the original cave-in happened. They look like the old miners, but wrong. Like they've been carved out from the inside." The sound of footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind us, slow, deliberate, getting closer, and with it came that hollow singing. "They found us," one of the boys whispered. "They always find us." Kate was already helping the students to their feet. "Is there another way out?" "The tunnels connect," the girl said. "But they know all the paths. They've been down here for 100 years. The singing was getting louder, and now I could hear multiple voices, that flat, empty harmony that made my teeth ache. At least 4 or 5 different singers, all moving toward us. "This way," I said, pointing deeper into the mine. "We'll find another route." "No," the blonde girl grabbed my arm. "That's where they come from, the deep places. That's where the real hollow men live." But we didn't have a choice. The singing was almost at the chamber entrance now, and I could see lights moving in the tunnel. Not flashlights, but a weird blue-green glow that seemed to come from inside the creatures themselves. We ran deeper into the mine, the 3 students stumbling behind us. The tunnels here were older, cut by hand instead of machines. The air was thicker, harder to breathe, and our lights seemed dimmer somehow, like the darkness was fighting back. Behind us, the hollow singing grew louder. And ahead of us, something else started to respond. A deeper sound, like a massive heartbeat echoing up from far underground. "What is that?" Kate asked. I thought about the old stories, about miners who dug too deep and found something that should have stayed buried. "I think," I said, "we're about to find out." The tunnel opened up into a vast chamber, bigger than anything that should exist in these hills. Our lights couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls, but scattered around the floor, glowing with that sick blue-green light, were dozens of figures. Hollow men, real ones. They stood perfectly still, like statues, but I could see them breathing. Their chests rose and fell, but instead of air, something dark and oily seemed to flow in and out of the empty spaces where their hearts should be. And in the center of the chamber, something massive moved in the shadows. Something that had been waiting in the dark for a very long time. One of the students screamed, and every hollow man in the chamber turned to look at us with those black, empty eyes. The hollow men moved like water, flowing across the chamber floor without seeming to take steps. Their empty chests made wet, sucking sounds as that dark substance pulsed through them. And in the center of it all, the massive shadow began to take shape. It was huge, maybe 20 feet tall, with too many arms and a face that looked like it had been carved from black stone. But the worst part was its eyes. Hundreds of them, scattered across its body like stars in a night sky, each one glowing with the same sick light as the hollow men. "The source," the blonde student whispered. "That's what they serve." I understood then. The hollow men weren't just dead miners, they were puppets. And this thing, this ancient creature that had been sleeping under the mountain for God knows how long, was pulling their strings. The creature spoke, and its voice was like grinding stone. "More offerings, how kind." Kate raised her flashlight like a weapon, which would have been funny if I wasn't so terrified. "Stay back," the thing laughed, and the sound made my bones vibrate. "You misunderstand. I do not take by force. They come to me willingly, in the end, when they see what I offer." "Which is what?" I managed to ask. "Freedom from pain, from loneliness, from the weight of being human." One of its massive arms gestured to the hollow men. They were afraid, once, afraid of the dark, of death, of being forgotten. Now they fear nothing, feel nothing, want nothing. "That's not life," Kate said. "That's just emptiness." "Exactly." The creature began to move toward us, its footsteps shaking the chamber. The hollow men followed, surrounding us in a circle of gray skin and black eyes. I counted at least 30 of them, including Sarah Chen, who smiled at me with her too wide mouth. "You have a choice," the creature continued. "Submit willingly, and the transformation will be gentle. Your memories will remain, your personality intact. You will simply be improved." "And if we refuse?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Then you will be taken by force. The result is the same, but the process is much less pleasant." I looked around the chamber, trying to find some way out. But the hollow men had us completely surrounded, and the only tunnel entrance was behind the creature. We were trapped. That's when I remembered my grandfather's mining lamp. It was an old carbide lamp, the kind miners used before electric lights. Granddad had given it to me when I started working the mines, said it belonged to his father before him. But there was something else, something he'd whispered to me when he was dying, high on pain medication and memory. "Blessed lamp," he'd said. "Mountain preacher blessed it after the cave-in. Iron and laurel, boy, iron and laurel." I'd thought it was just old man rambling, but now, as the hollow men closed in, I dug the lamp out of my pack. It was heavy, made of pure iron, and wrapped around the base was a thin cord of dried mountain laurel, the same plant my grandmother used to make tea. "What are you doing?" Kate whispered. "Something crazy." I struck the flint, and the lamp burst into bright, clean flame. The effect was immediate. Every hollow man in the chamber stepped back, their empty eyes reflecting the flame. Even the massive creature paused, its hundreds of eyes blinking in what might have been surprise. "Interesting," it said. "You carry old protections, but they will not save you for long." It was right. The flame was already starting to flicker, and I could see the hollow men gathering courage to move closer. But it had bought us time to think. "The mine entrance," I told Kate. "If we can get back to the main tunnel, maybe we can collapse it. Trap them down here." "With what?" I pulled the emergency flares from my pack. "These, plus some old mining charges I saw near the entrance. Enough to bring down the tunnel." Kate understood immediately. "But we'd have to get past all of them." "Not all of them, just enough." The creature was getting impatient. "Your light fades, Ranger. Submit now, and I will make you a commander among my servants. Refuse, and you will crawl through eternity as the least of them." "Go to hell," I said, and threw the lamp directly at its face. The creature roared as the iron and blessed flame struck it, and for just a moment, the hollow men faltered. In that moment, we ran. Kate grabbed the students and pushed them toward the tunnel, while I lit the first flare. Red light blazed through the chamber, and the hollow men scattered like insects. But they were already regrouping, and I could hear the creature bellowing commands behind us. We made it to the tunnel entrance, but the Sarah thing was waiting for us. Her black eyes reflected the flare light as she spread her arms to block our path. "You don't understand," she said in that flat voice. "It doesn't hurt. Being hollow doesn't hurt at all." I didn't have time to argue. I shoved the burning flare against her chest, and she dissolved like smoke, screaming. But her scream sounded almost grateful. Kate and the students were already running up the tunnel. Behind us, I could hear the hollow men pouring out of the chamber, their feet making wet, slapping sounds on the stone. But the flare light was keeping them back, barely. We reached the main tunnel and ran toward the entrance. I could see daylight through the crack, beautiful gray daylight that meant safety and the real world. But I also saw the mining charges I'd remembered, old dynamite sticks left over from the 1972nd sealing operation. "Get out!" I shouted to Kate. "Get them out and run." "What about you?" I was already pulling the fuses out of the dynamite. Someone has to light it, and someone has to make sure they don't follow. Kate looked like she wanted to argue, but the hollow men were almost on us. She pushed the students through the crack and squeezed out after them. I set the charges as fast as I could, working by the light of the dying flare. Behind me, the singing was getting louder. I could feel them coming, could smell that copper and rot stench getting stronger. The first hollow man rounded the corner just as I lit the fuse. I ran. The explosion threw me 20 feet through the air and out of the mine entrance. I hit the ground hard, covered in dust and debris, my ears ringing so loud I couldn't hear anything else. But I was alive, and I was outside. Kate pulled me to my feet. Behind us, the Copperhead mine was gone, just a pile of broken rock and twisted metal where the entrance used to be. The sound of the explosion echoed through the hills for a long time, and then everything was quiet. The three students were sitting on the ground, staring at the rubble. They looked dazed but human. Still human, thank God. The blonde girl was crying, but they were normal tears, not the empty sounds the hollow men made. "Is it over?" one of the boys asked. I listened carefully, but heard nothing from under the rocks. No singing, no breathing, no movement. "I think so." Kate helped me check the students for injuries while we waited for the rescue team she'd called on her radio once we got out of the dead zone. They were dehydrated and scared, but physically fine. They'd spend a few days in the hospital and the rest of their lives trying to convince people that what happened down there was real. Good luck with that. The official report listed the mine collapse as geological instability caused by recent heavy rains. The area was declared permanently off-limits, with new fencing and warning signs posted every 100 yards. The student's story was written off as trauma-induced hallucinations caused by bad air in the mine. Kate never talked about what we saw down there, not to me, not to anyone. But she requested a transfer to a different forest district 3 weeks later. Can't say I blame her. Me? I stayed on Copperhead Ridge. Someone has to keep an eye on things. Because the truth is, I'm not sure we got them all. Late at night, when the fog rolls in thick and the wind dies down, I sometimes hear singing from other sealed mines in the area, faint and far away, but definitely there. And sometimes, when I'm checking the barriers around the old mine sites, I find fresh flowers and food left by local families. The offerings never used to be there before the Copperhead Mine incident. But now they show up every few weeks, always at different locations, always at mines that have been sealed for decades. I've started a quiet network with other rangers in mining areas. We don't talk about it officially, but we share information. Stories about missing people near old mines, about strange sounds underground, about things that look human but aren't quite right. Turns out, the Copperhead Ridge wasn't the only place where miners dug too deep. My grandfather's lamp is hanging above my desk now. I've replaced the carbide and rewrapped the mountain laurel cord. Just in case, because even though the mine is sealed and the immediate danger is gone, I know the truth. There are hollow places under these mountains. Dark spaces where ancient things sleep and wait. Most of them will stay sleeping, as long as we're careful. As long as we remember the old warnings and respect the barriers our ancestors put in place. But some of them are already awake. And they're patient. They can wait another 100 years for the next group of miners, the next batch of students, the next curious souls who think the old stories are just superstition. My name is James Redmont, and I guard the sealed places. It's not the job I signed up for 17 years ago, but it's the job that needs doing. Because sometimes the old stories are true. And sometimes the things our grandfathers feared in the deep places are still down there, singing their hollow songs in the dark. Still waiting, still hungry, still hollow. My name is Samuel Greystone, and I've been a forest ranger for 14 years. Before that, I was a nuclear engineer until 3 Mile Island happened. After seeing what nuclear accidents could do to people, I needed a job where I could help protect folks instead of putting them in danger. I work in the Jefferson National Forest in Virginia, specifically around Black Mountain. It's beautiful country, but dangerous too. There's an old uranium mine up there that's been sealed since the 1942. My job is to monitor radiation levels and make sure hikers stay safe. I'm a man of science. I believe in facts, measurements, and data. I've never put much stock in ghost stories or Cherokee legends about spirit animals. My wife Sarah used to tease me about being too practical. She died 3 years ago from cancer, the same cancer that killed 12 other people in our old neighborhood near the nuclear plant. That's when I knew I had to change my life. Black Mountain is isolated. The closest town is 50 miles away, and most of the area around the old mine is restricted. Only rangers and researchers are allowed up there. It's quiet country, the kind of place where you can hear your own heartbeat. In winter, it gets even quieter. The snow muffles everything, and sometimes I go days without seeing another person. That's how I like it. Just me, my equipment, and the forest. I carry a Geiger counter everywhere I go. It's an old Ludlum Model 3, reliable and simple. Sarah used to call it my security blanket. The steady clicking sound is comforting. It means everything is normal, safe. When the clicking speeds up, that's when I pay attention. The Cherokee families who lived in this area left in the 1942. Right before the mine opened, my supervisor told me they talked about some kind of spirit that warned of danger. Death flying on wings, they called it. I figured it was just their way of sensing the radiation danger before science could measure it properly. I should have listened to those stories. It started 3 weeks ago when a couple of hikers came down from the mountain talking about a giant moth. They said it was bigger than a man, with glowing red eyes that followed them for miles. They were scared, really scared, but I figured they'd seen an owl or maybe a small aircraft. Probably just an optical illusion, I told them. The altitude and cold air can play tricks on your eyes, but my supervisor asked me to check it out anyway. "If there's something up there affecting wildlife, we need to know about it," he said. "Could be radiation poisoning, causing mutations." So I packed my gear and headed up Black Mountain. My Geiger counter, camping equipment, camera, and radio. Standard procedure for investigating unusual animal reports. I expected to find nothing more than normal background radiation and maybe some confused hikers. I was wrong about everything. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. Even for Black Mountain, this was unusual. No bird songs, no small animals rustling in the brush. Just the crunch of my boots in the snow and the steady clicking of my Geiger counter. Then I found the first dead animals. 3 deer lay in the snow about 2 miles from the mine entrance. At first glance, it looked like they died from the cold or starvation. But when I got closer, I saw something that made my skin crawl. They were arranged in a perfect triangle, each deer exactly the same distance from the others. Their heads all pointed toward the sealed mine entrance. This wasn't random. Something had moved these animals after they died. I checked my Geiger counter. Normal background radiation, nothing unusual. But the dead deer showed no signs of radiation sickness. Their fur wasn't falling out, no skin problems, nothing like what I'd expect from exposure. I took pictures and kept moving up the mountain. The trail was easy to follow in the snow, but I noticed something strange. Alongside my own footprints and the normal tracks of rabbits and squirrels, there were other marks in the snow. They looked like wing impressions, but massive ones. Each print was nearly 6 feet across. Probably fallen branches, I said to myself. But branches don't make patterns that regular. As I climbed higher, I found more dead animals. Always in groups, always arranged in geometric shapes. Rabbits in a straight line, their bodies pointing toward the mine. A family of raccoons in a perfect circle. Each scene was more unsettling than the last. My radio crackled. It was Dr. Elena Martinez, the wildlife biologist who sometimes worked with me on unusual cases. "Sam, how's it looking up there?" "Strange," I said. "Dead animals, but not from radiation. Something's arranging them in patterns." "Patterns? What kind of patterns?" I described what I'd found. There was silence on the other end for a long moment. "Sam, I've been researching those hiker reports. I found some old Cherokee oral histories. They mention a creature they called the Moth Prophet. It appeared before disasters, trying to warn people." "Come on, Elena. You're a scientist. I know how it sounds. But listen to this. There are records of similar sightings before every major disaster in this region for the past century. Before the mine accident in 1943, before the dam collapse in 1962, before the chemical plant explosion in 1978. My Geiger counter suddenly started clicking faster. Not dangerous levels, but definitely elevated. I looked around, trying to find the source. "Elena, I'm getting higher radiation readings, but there's no source I can identify." "Where exactly are you?" I checked my GPS. "About a 1/4 mile from the mine entrance, near the old Cherokee burial ground." "Sam, get out of there. Those oral histories say the creature appears strongest near sacred sites when disaster is coming." I wanted to laugh, but something in her voice stopped me. Elena had been a wildlife biologist for 20 years. She didn't scare easily. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow moving between the trees, but shadows don't glow with a soft red light. I raised my camera and tried to focus, but the thing moved too fast. It was huge, definitely bigger than any moth or bird I'd ever seen. The red glow came from what looked like eyes, positioned high up, maybe 8 feet off the ground. As I watched, it disappeared behind a ridge. My Geiger counter was going crazy now, clicking rapidly. But when I pointed it in the direction where the creature had gone, the readings dropped to normal. "Elena, I think I just saw something." "Describe it." "Large, flying, red glowing eyes, just like the hikers said." "Sam, you need to come down from the mountain, right now." "I'm a scientist, Elena. I don't run from things I don't understand. I study them. Some things are too dangerous to study." I kept climbing. My job was to investigate unusual reports, and that's what I was going to do. But as the sun began to set, I started to wish I'd listened to Elena. The trees around me were dying. Not just winter dormancy, they were actually dying. The bark was peeling off in long strips, and the branches looked brittle and cracked. It was as if something was slowly draining the life out of the forest. I made camp near a small clearing, close enough to the mine entrance to investigate in the morning, but far enough away to feel safe. As I set up my tent, I found more of those massive wing prints in the snow. These were fresh, made within the last hour. Whatever was up here, it was watching me. I didn't sleep well. Every sound made me reach for my flashlight, but when I looked outside, there was nothing but empty forest. My Geiger counter sat beside my sleeping bag, clicking steadily. Normal background radiation all night. Just before dawn, the clicking stopped. Complete silence. That's not normal for a Geiger counter. They always detect some background radiation. I checked the batteries, tested the circuits. Everything seemed fine, but the device showed zero radiation. Impossible. I stepped outside my tent and immediately noticed something wrong. The snow around my campsite had melted in a perfect circle, about 20 feet across, but the temperature was still well below freezing, and there was no heat source. In the bare ground where the snow had melted, I saw them clearly for the first time. Footprints, if you could call them that. They looked like a combination of bird talons and human feet, each one nearly a foot long. There were dozens of them, circling my tent. Whatever had made these tracks had walked around my campsite all night while I slept. My hands were shaking as I packed up my gear. I'd come up here as a skeptic, but the evidence was getting hard to ignore. Something large and unknown was living on this mountain. I radioed Elena. No response. Tried again. Static. The mine entrance was only a quarter-mile away. I decided to check it out before heading back down. If there was a scientific explanation for what I was seeing, I'd find it there. The closer I got to the mine, the stranger things became. The trees weren't just dying, they were twisted into spiral shapes, as if something had spun them like drills. The very rocks looked wrong, worn smooth in patterns that didn't match natural erosion. Then I saw the scales. They were scattered around the mine entrance like fallen leaves. Each one was nearly the size of my hand, metallic silver with an oily rainbow sheen. They looked exactly like moth scales, but no moth was this large. I picked one up carefully. It was warm to the touch and seemed to vibrate slightly. When I held my Geiger counter near it, the device went berserk. The radiation reading was off the charts, but it wasn't any isotope I recognized. The signature was completely unknown. Impossible, I whispered. But I was holding the evidence in my hand. A shadow passed over me. I looked up and saw it clearly for the first time. The creature was massive, with a wingspan of at least 20 feet. Its wings moved like a moth's, but its body was wrong. Too long, too segmented, covered in those shimmering scales. The head was the worst part, vaguely human-shaped but larger, with compound eyes that glowed deep red. It circled overhead once, twice, then landed on a ridge about 50 yards away. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. Every instinct told me to run, but I was frozen in place. Then it spoke. Not with its mouth, the words appeared directly in my mind. Danger comes, the earth will burn, you must warn them. Images flooded my brain. The nuclear power plant 30 miles east of Black Mountain. Reactor cooling systems failing. Radiation spreading across the Appalachian Mountains like a poison cloud. Thousands dead, millions more evacuated from their homes. When? I managed to whisper. 3 days. The metal hearts will crack. The fire that cannot be quenched will spread. More images. Technical diagrams of reactor cooling systems. Stress fractures in containment vessels. Water pumps failing in sequence. I recognized the equipment. It was identical to what I'd worked on as a nuclear engineer. The creature spread its wings and launched itself into the air. As it flew over my head, I felt a wave of heat and radiation that should have killed me instantly. But instead of pain, I felt understanding. This thing wasn't trying to hurt me. It was trying to save everyone. My radio crackled back to life. Elena's voice panicked. Sam, can you hear me? I'm here. Something's happening at the power plant. They're reporting equipment failures. You need to get down here now. I looked at the scale in my hand. Still warm, still vibrating. The creature's words echoed in my mind. You must warn them. Elena, listen carefully. Evacuate the area around the nuclear plant, now. What, Sam, what are you talking about? There's going to be an accident. A bad one. We have maybe 3 days. Silence on the radio. Then, "Sam, are you feeling all right? Have you been exposed to radiation up there?" How could I explain? How could I tell her that a giant moth from Cherokee legend had shown me visions of nuclear disaster? She'd think I was having hallucinations from radiation exposure. But I had to try. By the time I got back to town, the situation at the nuclear plant had gotten worse. Cooling system pumps were failing exactly as the creature had shown me. Plant officials were calling it a maintenance issue, nothing serious. I tried to convince my supervisor to recommend evacuation procedures. He looked at me like I was crazy. "Sam, you've been under a lot of stress since Sarah died. Maybe you should take some time off. Check the emergency protocols," I begged him. "Look at the cooling system specifications. I'm telling you, there's going to be a cascade failure." But how could I explain where my information came from? I sounded like a madman. Elena met me at the ranger station that evening. She'd brought coffee and the look of someone who was worried about a friend's mental health. "Talk to me, Sam. What really happened up there?" I told her everything. The dead animals, the wing prints, the creature, the visions. She listened without interrupting, but I could see the concern growing in her eyes. "Sam, you've been exposed to trauma, loss, stress. Sometimes our minds create explanations for things we can't understand. Look at this." I showed her the scale I'd collected. Under her microscope, we could see the cellular structure. It was like nothing in any biology textbook. The radioactive signature was equally impossible. Isotopes that shouldn't exist in nature. "This doesn't make sense," Elena muttered, adjusting the microscope. "The cellular structure it's like it exists in multiple dimensions at once." That night, Elena had the dreams. She called me at 3 in the morning, terrified. "Sam, I saw it. The plant, the explosion, people running. It felt more real than real. The creature contacted you too. What is it, Sam? What does it want?" I'd been thinking about that question all day. "I think it's trying to prevent a disaster. The Cherokee stories say it appears before catastrophes. Maybe it's not causing them. Maybe it's trying to stop them. But why you? Why us? I worked in nuclear plants. You're a scientist people trust. We have the knowledge and credibility to make them listen." Except nobody was listening. By the second day, more equipment was failing at the plant. The patterns matched exactly what the creature had shown me. But plant officials kept insisting everything was under control. That's when Elena and I decided to break into the nuclear facility. We used my old security clearances and Elena's research credentials to get past the outer gates. Once inside, I headed straight for the cooling system controls. If we could manually override the failing pumps, we might prevent the cascade failure. The control room was in chaos. Technicians were running between computer terminals, trying to diagnose multiple system failures. The plant supervisor, a man named Peterson, was on the phone with federal regulators. "Peterson," I called out. "You need to initiate emergency shutdown procedures now." "Sam, what are you doing here? This is a restricted area. I know exactly what's going wrong with your systems. Cooling pump 3 is going to fail in the next 6 hours. When it does, the backup systems will be overloaded and you'll have a full meltdown." "That's impossible. The backup systems are designed to handle single-point failures. Not when the failures happen in sequence. Look at pumps 1 and 2. They're already operating at 90% capacity, right?" Peterson's face went pale. "How did you know that?" I couldn't tell him about the visions, but I could use my engineering knowledge to make the case. Because I designed systems like this. When you lose cooling capacity gradually, the remaining pumps work harder and fail faster. It's a cascade effect. Elena had positioned herself at the emergency communications panel. If Peterson wouldn't order an evacuation, she was prepared to send out warnings herself. "Sir," one of the technicians called out, "cooling pump 3 just went offline." The room went silent except for the sound of alarms beginning to blare. Peterson stared at me in shock. "How did you know?" "Evacuate the surrounding area now," I said. "You have maybe 4 hours before containment fails." That's when the creature appeared. It materialized in the control room like smoke, becoming solid. 20 feet of impossible anatomy, glowing eyes, wings that seemed to bend space around them. Everyone in the room froze. The creature spoke, not with words but directly into our minds. The broken atoms sing their death song, stop their music before it spreads. Only Elena and I seemed able to move. The others stood transfixed, caught in whatever field the creature projected. I ran to the emergency controls. The manual shutdown procedure required 2 people to activate simultaneously. Elena joined me, her hands shaking but determined. "On 3, I said. 1, 2. We turned our keys together. The reactor began its emergency shutdown sequence, just as the cooling system display showed total failure. If we'd waited another 10 minutes, the containment vessel would have cracked. The creature nodded once, then faded away like mist. The other technicians blinked and stumbled, confused about what had just happened. "Gas leak," Peterson announced quickly. Everyone must have been hallucinating, but Elena and I knew better. The official report blamed the near disaster on a computer virus that caused multiple system failures. My quick thinking and knowledge of nuclear systems were credited with preventing a catastrophe. Peterson recommended me for a commendation. I was quietly transferred to a different forest region the following month. "For your own protection," my supervisor said. Too much stress associated with that area. But the creature's work wasn't finished, and neither was mine. 6 months later, Elena called me about another incident. A dam in Tennessee was showing stress fractures that engineers hadn't detected. She'd been having dreams about flooding, about people trapped in rising water. I drove down to investigate. Sure enough, I found the moth scales scattered around the dam's base. The creature was trying to warn us again. This time, we knew how to listen. We convinced the dam authority to do emergency inspections using the technical details from Elena's dreams. They found hairline fractures that would have caused total failure within weeks. The dam was evacuated and repaired, preventing a flood that would have killed thousands. Over the past 3 years, Elena and I have responded to 7 similar incidents. Chemical plant explosions prevented, bridge collapses avoided, forest fires stopped before they spread. Each time, we find the scales. Each time, one of us has the dreams. We've learned some things about the creature. It exists outside normal time, seeing all possible futures simultaneously. It can only appear when disaster is imminent, and only in places where the barriers between dimensions are thin. Old sacred sites, areas with radiation exposure, places where terrible things have happened before. The Cherokee were right. It's not evil, it's trying to save us from ourselves. Every technological disaster we prevent means fewer souls joining whatever collective consciousness the creature represents. Elena thinks it might be the combined spirits of everyone who has died in nuclear accidents, chemical spills, and industrial disasters. Their way of trying to prevent others from suffering the same fate. I don't know if that's true, but I know the creature feels familiar somehow. Sometimes, when it speaks in my mind, I hear Sarah's voice mixed in with the others. We don't publicize what we do. Who would believe us? Instead, we work quietly, using our scientific credentials and the creature's warnings to prevent disasters before they happen. We've saved tens of thousands of lives that will never know how close they came to dying. People call me lucky now. Ranger Sam always seems to know when something's about to go wrong. They don't know about the scales I find, or the dreams that wake me at 3 in the morning, or the massive shadow I sometimes see flying over disaster sites. Last week, Elena found scales near a pipeline in West Virginia. She's been having dreams about fire and underground explosions. We're driving down tomorrow to investigate. The moth prophet of Black Mountain is still watching, still warning, still trying to save us from the consequences of our own technology. As long as we build things that can fail catastrophically, it will be there. And as long as it appears, Elena and I will be listening. Because someone has to believe in impossible things when impossible things are the only explanation that makes sense. Someone has to stand between human progress and human disaster. Even if that someone is just a lonely ranger who learned to trust Cherokee legends, a wildlife biologist who believes in prophetic dreams, and a creature that shouldn't exist but does. The forest is quiet again tonight. My Geiger counter clicks steadily. Normal background radiation, everything is safe. For now, but I keep my camera ready and my radio charged. Because somewhere out there, the moth prophet is watching for the next disaster, the next warning that needs to be given, the next catastrophe that can still be prevented. And when it calls, I'll answer. That's what forest rangers do. We protect people from dangers they don't even know exist, even when those dangers fly on 20-foot wings and speak in visions of tomorrow's tragedies. My name is Rebecca Mountainheart, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years. In all that time, searching these mountains for lost folks, I never found anything I wasn't looking for. Until last winter, when the bone whistlers started calling. I worked the George Washington National Forest in West Virginia, mostly around Devil's Backbone Ridge. It's a mean piece of ground, knife-edge ridges that drop into hidden valleys, rocks that'll slice you open if you slip, and weather that changes faster than a spooked deer. Folks get lost up here all the time. Sometimes we find them. Sometimes we don't. My grandmother used to tell stories about these mountains. She was Cherokee, mixed with some Scots-Irish from way back. Said the old people knew things about this land that we'd forgotten, talked about bone magic and death curses like they were real as rainfall. I never put much stock in those stories. Figured they were just old superstitions from people who didn't understand the world yet. That was before I learned some things can't be explained away. The call came in on February 15th, 1987. A family of 4 hikers, the Pattersons from Richmond, had gone missing during an unexpected blizzard. Dad, Mom, 2 teenage kids. They'd planned a day hike on the Devil's Backbone Trail, but the storm hit fast and hard. Ice was coating everything within hours. I suited up and headed out with my partner, Corporal Rick Dalton from the state police. Rick's been doing search and rescue almost as long as me. Good man, steady nerves, knows the mountains. We've pulled more than a few people out of trouble together. The storm was still pushing snow around when we started tracking. Ice storms up here are killers. They coat every branch, every rock, every step with slick death. The trees groan under the weight until they crack like gunshots. Walking becomes a careful dance between staying upright and not getting crushed. We found the Patterson family's car at the trailhead, already buried under 6 inches of fresh snow. Their gear was good, their plan was solid. They should have turned back when the weather got bad. Most smart folks do. But their tracks led up the mountain anyway. Tracks look fresh, Rick said, kneeling by the clearest footprints. Maybe 3, 4 hours old. I nodded and shouldered my pack. Family of 4, heading up toward the ridge. Storm hit around noon, so they've been out in this for a while. The first mile of trail was normal enough. We followed their tracks through the snow, reading the story they told. Dad in the lead, Mom bringing up the rear, kids staying close together in the middle. Smart formation for a family hike. But something felt wrong from the start. Can't say exactly what. Just a feeling in my gut, like when you hear a twig snap in the dark. The forest was too quiet. Even in a storm, you usually hear something. Birds, wind in the trees, snow sliding off branches. But the silence up here felt heavy, like it was pressing down on us. Dogs acting funny, Rick said. He'd brought 2 search dogs with us, both trained and experienced. But they kept whimpering, pulling back toward the car instead of following the trail. I looked at the animals. Both were shivering, but not from cold. Their ears were flat, tails tucked. That's fear behavior. Maybe the storms got them spooked, I said, but I didn't believe it. These dogs had worked in worse weather. We kept following the tracks. The family had made good time at first, staying on the main trail. But about 2 miles up, something changed. The footprints started wandering. Not like they were lost, more like they were following something we couldn't see. That's when I noticed the first bones. They were arranged in a neat line beside the trail, almost hidden under a fallen log. Animal bones, looked like rabbit or squirrel, but they'd been carved. Holes drilled through them in careful patterns. When the wind caught them just right, they made a low whistling sound. "What do you make of that?" Rick asked. I picked up one of the bones, turned it over in my gloved hands. The holes were too precise to be natural, too old to be fresh. Maybe some kid's project, scout group or something. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't right. The carving work was too skilled, too deliberate, and there was something about the sound they made that set my teeth on edge. The Patterson family's tracks led right past the bones and kept going up the mountain. We followed the trail for another hour before we found the first impossible thing. The footprints in the snow changed direction without turning around. I've been tracking for most of my life. My grandmother taught me when I was barely tall enough to see over the ferns. A person's tracks tell a story, where they've been, where they're going, how fast they're moving, whether they're tired or scared or hurt. But these tracks didn't make sense. The Patterson family had been walking north up the trail. Their prints showed a steady pace, normal gait. Then suddenly, in the space of 3 steps, they were walking south. Not like they'd turned around, the prints were still pointing the same direction, but they were going backward. "That's not possible," Rick said, crouching down to study the marks in the snow. I knelt beside him. The tracks were clear as day. 4 sets of boot prints, all pointing north, but the spacing showed they were moving south, like they'd been walking backward up the mountain without turning around. "Maybe the storm covered some tracks, made it look different," Rick suggested. But he didn't sound convinced. I stood up and looked ahead. The trail curved around a rocky outcrop about 50 yards up. Beyond that, I could see more of the bone whistles. Dozens of them, hanging from tree branches like some kind of wind chime. The sound they made was getting louder, not just whistling now, but almost like music. Simple melodies that seemed to repeat and overlap. The search dogs refused to go any further. Both animals sat down in the snow and wouldn't budge, no matter how much Rick coaxed them. "Something's got them spooked good," he said. "Maybe we should call for backup." I was about to agree when we heard voices up ahead. Faint, but definitely human. A man's voice calling for help. We left the dogs tied to a tree and moved up the trail. The bone music got louder with each step. It wasn't random noise. There was a pattern to it, like someone was playing an actual song. But who would be up here in this weather making music out of animal bones? Around the rocky outcrop, the trail opened into a small clearing. The voices were coming from somewhere beyond it, but I couldn't see anyone. The sound echoed off the rocks in a way that made it hard to tell where it was coming from. That's when Rick grabbed my arm. "Look at that," he whispered. On the far side of the clearing, there was another set of tracks in the snow. But these weren't boot prints. They looked almost human, but wrong somehow. Longer than they should be, with claw marks where toes should be. And they were fresh, so fresh that snow was still settling into the deepest parts. The bone music was coming from all around us now. I could see hundreds of the carved instruments hanging from every tree, dancing in the wind. The melodies they played seemed to pull at something inside my head, like they were trying to lead my thoughts in a particular direction. "We need to find that family," I said, but my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Distant and echoey. Rick nodded, but he looked confused too, like he was trying to remember why we were there. We followed the sound of voices deeper into the clearing. The man's voice was still calling for help, but now I could hear a woman too, and what might have been kids. They sounded close, maybe just behind the next stand of trees. But every time we walked toward the voices, they seemed to move further away. That's when I saw the Cherokee Scout. He was standing at the edge of the tree line, maybe 30 yards away. Dressed in old-style buckskins and war paint, carrying a long rifle. For just a moment, I thought he was real. Maybe another search and rescue volunteer in period costume, but when I blinked, he was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked Rick. "See what?" I looked back at where the figure had been standing. There were no tracks in the snow, no sign anyone had ever been there. The bone music was getting inside my head now, making it hard to think straight. The melodies seemed to be pulling me in different directions, and I caught myself walking toward the tree line without meaning to. "Rebecca!" Rick's voice sounded far away, even though he was right beside me. "Rebecca, where are you going?" I stopped and looked around. I was halfway across the clearing, heading for the spot where I'd seen the Cherokee Scout. I didn't remember deciding to walk this way. "The music," I said, it's making me..." That's when we heard the screaming. It was coming from somewhere up ahead, beyond the trees. A woman's voice, high and terrified. Then a man shouting, kids crying. The Patterson family was in trouble. We ran toward the sound, fighting our way through thick brush and low-hanging branches heavy with ice. The bone music was all around us now, so loud it was hard to hear anything else. But underneath it, I could still make out human voices calling for help. We pushed through a final wall of pine branches and came out on a narrow ledge. Below us was a drop of maybe 200 feet into a rocky valley. And there, scattered across the ledge like they'd been thrown, were pieces of the Patterson family's gear. Backpacks torn open. Sleeping bags shredded. A child's jacket hanging from a tree branch, swaying in the wind. But no bodies. No blood. No sign of what had happened to them. The screaming had stopped. The only sound now was the bone music, playing its impossible melodies in the winter air. We searched the ledge for over an hour. But it was like the Patterson family had just vanished. Their gear was there, scattered and torn, but they were gone without a trace. No blood, no drag marks. Nothing to show what had happened to them. "This doesn't make sense," Rick kept saying. "4 people don't just disappear." I was starting to get scared. Not the normal kind of fear you feel when you're worried about lost hikers. This was something deeper, colder. Like the mountains themselves were watching us. The bone whistles were everywhere now, hanging from every tree, wedged into rock cracks, even buried in the snow so that the wind could still reach them. The music they made was getting more complex, different instruments playing different parts, like a whole orchestra made of carved animal bones. And it was affecting us. I could feel it pulling at my thoughts, trying to make me walk in certain directions. Rick was fighting it too. I could see him shake his head every few minutes, like he was trying to clear it. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Call for more help, bring in a full search team." But when we tried to leave, we couldn't find our way back. The trail we'd followed up the mountain was gone. Not covered by snow or hidden, actually gone. Where it should have been, there was only thick forest and steep rocks. Our own footprints in the snow led to a wall of stone that couldn't have been there before. "That's impossible," Rick said. "We came this way. I know we came this way." I checked my compass. The needle was spinning slowly, like it couldn't decide which way was north. My GPS unit was showing error messages. The bone music was getting louder, and now I was starting to hear voices in it. Not the Patterson family. These were different voices, speaking in a language I almost recognized. Cherokee, maybe, like my grandmother used to speak when she thought no one was listening. That's when I saw them clearly for the first time. Cherokee scouts, moving through the trees like shadows. They wore traditional war paint and carried old-style weapons. Tomahawks, bows, flintlock rifles. But there was something wrong with them. They moved too smoothly, like they were floating just above the ground. And when the wind shifted, I could see right through them. Ghosts. The Cherokee scouts were ghosts. "Rick," I whispered. "Do you see them?" He followed my gaze, squinting through the falling snow. "See what?" They were all around us now. Dozens of them, moving in and out of the trees. Some were playing bone flutes, adding their music to the wind chimes. Others were just watching us with eyes that glowed like coals. And I was starting to remember my grandmother's stories. During the Civil War, Cherokee scouts had worked these mountains for both sides. They knew the land better than anyone, could move through terrain that would stop a whole army. But some of the white soldiers didn't trust them, called them witches and devil worshippers. There had been executions. Cherokee scouts accused of using bone magic to summon spirits and curse their enemies. They'd been killed right here on Devil's Backbone Ridge, their bodies left for the wolves. But what if the stories were true? What if the bone magic was real? "We need to find the Pattersons," I said, but my voice sounded hollow to my own ears. The ghost scouts began to move, drifting through the forest in a loose formation. They were heading deeper into the mountains, toward the most remote parts of Devil's Backbone. The bone music grew stronger, more insistent, pulling us to follow. "Rebecca, we should go back," Rick said. But even as he spoke, he was walking forward, following the spirits. We didn't have a choice. The music was inside our heads now, controlling our feet. We walked behind the Cherokee ghosts like we were part of their war party, deeper into the wild country where no living person should go. The landscape began to change. Trees that had been there moments before vanished, replaced by different ones. Rocks shifted and moved. Streams appeared where none had been marked on any map. We weren't in the present anymore. We were walking through the past, following trails that had existed 124 years ago. That's when we found the boneyard. It was hidden in a valley that shouldn't have existed, a circular depression surrounded by standing stones that looked like they'd been there since the beginning of time. The ground was covered with bones, human bones, carved with the same careful holes as the wind chimes. And in the center of the valley, the Patterson family sat around a small fire, playing bone flutes with steady, vacant expressions. They were alive. But they weren't themselves anymore. "Mom," I called out. "Dad?" Mrs. Patterson looked up at me, but her eyes were empty. She smiled and held up her flute, made from what looked like a human arm bone, and began to play a haunting melody. The rest of the family joined in. Their music blended with the wind chimes, creating harmonies that made the air itself seem to vibrate. And I could feel it working on us, trying to pull us into the circle, trying to make us sit down and take up instruments of our own. Rick was already walking toward them, his hand reaching out like he wanted to take one of the bone flutes. That's when I remembered something else from my grandmother's stories. The Cherokee scouts hadn't been executed for witchcraft. They'd been executed for trying to protect their people's burial grounds. The soldiers had disturbed sacred sites, scattered bones that should have been left in peace. The bone magic wasn't evil, it was justice. But it was justice that would kill us all if I couldn't stop it. The Cherokee scout stepped out from behind one of the standing stones. He was solid now, real as life, but I could smell death on him, old death, the kind that had been waiting more than a century for its due. "Mountain Heart," he said in Cherokee. My grandmother's language flowed from his lips like water. "Daughter of the mountain's heart, you have forgotten your people." I understood him perfectly, even though I'd never learned more than a few words of the old tongue. The knowledge was in my blood, waking up after years of sleeping. "I remember," I said, and found myself answering in Cherokee. "I remember the stories." "Stories?" The scout laughed, but there was no humor in it. "These are not stories, daughter. This is truth written in blood and bone." Around the fire, the Patterson family continued their bone music, but I could see now what was really happening. With each note they played, they were fading, becoming more like spirits and less like living people. Soon they would be ghosts too, trapped in this valley forever. "They don't deserve this," I said. "They're innocent." "Innocent?" The scout pointed to the scattered bones covering the ground. "Were my brothers innocent when the soldiers killed them for trying to protect our sacred places? Were the children innocent when they starved because the white men stole our hunting grounds?" Rick was almost at the fire now, reaching for a bone flute that one of the Patterson kids held out to him. His eyes were as empty as theirs. "Stop," I shouted, but my voice was lost in the music. The scout smiled. "Your friend will play our songs forever, as will you, if you have any wisdom left. Join us willingly, and your death will be peaceful. Resist, and you will suffer as we suffered." But I was beginning to understand something he didn't expect. My grandmother hadn't just told me Cherokee stories, she'd taught me Cherokee ways, including some she'd made me promise never to speak of. "You're not seeking justice," I said. "You're seeking revenge. There's a difference." "They are the same thing." "No, they're not." I pulled off my gloves and reached into my jacket pocket. My fingers found the small medicine bundle my grandmother had given me years ago. Tobacco, sage, a piece of quartz crystal, and something else she'd never explained. "Justice honors the dead. Revenge just makes more death." The scout's eyes narrowed. "You know nothing of our ways, half-blood." "I know enough." I opened the medicine bundle and scattered the contents on the ground. "I know the old songs, the real ones, not this twisted music you're making." I began to sing. It was a song my grandmother had taught me when I was very small. A mourning song for those who had died far from home. The Cherokee scouts stopped playing their bone flutes. The Patterson family looked up from their fire with confusion in their eyes. The scout rushed at me, but his hands passed right through my throat. The mourning song had power he couldn't touch. "You think your white man's magic can stop us?" he snarled. "This isn't white man's magic. This is older than the war that killed you. This is Cherokee magic, the kind that honors the dead instead of enslaving them." I kept singing, pouring all my grief and love into the ancient words. Grief for my people, who had lost so much. Love for the land that remembered everything. The bone music was fighting against my song, but it was weakening. "The bones of the sacred places must be returned," the scout said. "The debt must be paid. Then I'll pay it." I pulled out my knife and cut across my palm, letting blood drop onto the scattered bones. "I'm Cherokee too. My blood is their blood. Let that be enough." The scout stared at me for a long moment. Around us, the other ghosts had stopped their music entirely. Even the wind chimes hanging in the trees had gone silent. "Your blood alone is not enough," he said finally. "But your promise might be." "What promise?" "Promise to find our scattered bones. Promise to return them to their proper resting places. Promise to teach others the old ways, so they won't be forgotten again." I looked at the Patterson family. They were starting to look more human, less ghostly. Rick had dropped the bone flute and was shaking his head like he was waking up from a bad dream. "I promise," I said. The scout nodded once. Then he raised his own bone flute to his lips and played a different song, not the compelling music that had trapped us, but something peaceful and sad. A farewell song. One by one, the other Cherokee ghosts joined in. The boneyard filled with their music, but now it was beautiful instead of frightening. I could feel the anger leaving them, replaced by something that felt like rest. The song built to a crescendo, then faded away like wind through the trees. When the last note died, the ghosts were gone. The Patterson family blinked and looked around in confusion. The bone instruments in their hands crumbled to dust. "Where are we?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "How did we get here?" Rick stumbled over to where I was standing. "Rebecca, what happened?" I remember following the trail, and then, nothing. I looked around the valley. Already it was beginning to fade, becoming less solid. The standing stones were just ordinary rocks now. The scattered bones were sinking into the earth, returning to the rest they should have found long ago. "Come on," I said. "Let's go home." We found our way back to the main trail easily. The bone whistles were still hanging in the trees, but they were silent now. The mountain felt peaceful in a way it hadn't before, like something that had been wound too tight had finally been allowed to relax. The Patterson family had no memory of their time in the boneyard. As far as they knew, they'd gotten lost in the storm and spent the night in a cave. Rick remembered even less than they did, just following the trail and then waking up confused. Only I remembered it all. We called in our position on the radio and had a helicopter pick us up from a clearing about a mile down the mountain. The official report credited superior tracking skills and lucky break for finding the family alive. No mention of bone whistles or Cherokee ghosts. Some stories aren't meant for official reports, but I kept my promise. I spent the next few months learning everything I could about the Cherokee scouts who'd been executed on Devil's Backbone Ridge. Found records in dusty archives, talked to tribal elders, pieced together names and stories that had been forgotten for over a century. More importantly, I found their bones. They'd been scattered across the mountain when the army broke up their burial sites. Some had been taken by collectors, others just left to wither away in remote caves and hidden valleys. It took me 3 years, but I found them all and returned them to a proper resting place, with traditional Cherokee burial ceremonies conducted by tribal elders. I also started learning the old ways. Language, songs, ceremonies my grandmother had tried to teach me, but I'd been too stubborn to listen to. It's harder to learn as an adult, but some things in the blood never fully disappear. The mountains are quieter now. I still work, search and rescue, still find lost hikers and bring them home safely, but I haven't heard bone music on the wind since that winter night in 1987. Sometimes, though, when I'm alone on the high ridges, I feel like I'm being watched. Not by anything dangerous, more like ancestors keeping an eye on their descendant, making sure I'm honoring the promises I made. I've been transferred to other parts of the forest since then, but I always come back to Devil's Backbone when I can. The Cherokee scouts trusted me with their story, and I won't let it be forgotten again. Last month, I met another ranger who'd been having strange experiences in the Appalachian Mountains of Tennessee. Missing hikers found with no memory of where they'd been. Stories about ghostly figures in period clothing. Bone whistles hanging from trees. It seems the Cherokee weren't the only ones who left unfinished business in these mountains. I gave her my grandmother's medicine bundle and taught her the morning song. Some knowledge is too important to die with one person. The mountains remember everything. Someone has to help them rest. My name is Rebecca Mountainheart, and I've been a park ranger for 18 years now. In all that time searching these mountains for lost souls, I've learned that sometimes what's lost isn't people at all. Sometimes it's justice, sometimes it's peace, and sometimes, if you know the right songs, you can help them find their way home. My name is David Hollowtree, and I've been a ranger in these West Virginia mountains for 16 winters. People always ask about the name Hollowtree. My grandfather said it means beloved of the empty places. Never thought much about it until what happened in Hunger Hollow. I grew up here in coal country during the hard times. My dad worked the mines until they closed in '78, same year this story takes place. When the snow started falling that October, earlier than anyone remembered, I knew we were in for a rough winter. But I'd handled plenty of those. Winter rescue was my thing. Hypothermia cases, lost hunters, folks who thought they could outsmart the mountains. I'd seen it all. Or so I thought. The hollow got its name back in the 1,930 seconds during the worst years. When the mines shut down, whole families starved. Some disappeared completely. Others, well, the old-timers whispered stories about what people did to survive. But those were just stories. Desperate times make people tell tall tales. I should have listened better. The first call came on a Tuesday morning in late October. The snow was already knee-deep and still falling. 4 hunters from Pittsburgh had come down for deer season. They were supposed to check in Monday night. When they didn't, their families called us. Probably just holed up somewhere waiting out the storm. I told my partner Angela Brooks over coffee. She was newer to the mountains but good with hypothermia cases. Smart woman, always asked the right questions. Temperature dropped to 15 below last night, she said, checking the weather report. If they're stuck without proper gear, we both knew what that meant. In weather like this, you had maybe 12 hours before the cold started winning. I grabbed my pack and checked my gear. Emergency blankets, first aid kit, flares, rope, emergency food, everything a ranger needs for winter rescue. Angela did the same. We'd done this dance plenty of times. The snow kept falling as we loaded the truck. Big, fat flakes that made everything quiet and white, pretty, if you didn't know what it could do to people. Where were they hunting? Angela asked as we drove toward the trailhead. Hunger Hollow, up near the old Peterson place. She looked at me funny. Thought that area was off limits. It is, mostly, but hunters don't always read the signs. The Peterson place had been abandoned since the 1932nd. Like a lot of homesteads up there, the family just vanished one winter. Some said they moved to the city, others whispered different stories. The kind grandmothers told to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. We parked at the trailhead and started hiking. The snow was coming down so hard we could barely see 10 feet ahead. Our boots crunched with each step, the only sound in the white silence. "David," Angela said after we'd been walking about an hour, "look at this." She was pointing at a tree, about 20 feet off the trail. At first, I didn't see what had caught her eye. Then I got closer, and my stomach dropped. The bark was torn off in long strips, about head-high. But not from an animal. The marks looked like teeth marks, human teeth marks. Like someone had been so hungry, they tried to eat the tree. "What kind of animal does that?" Angela asked. I touched the marks with my gloved hand. They were fresh, recent. "I don't know," I said, but a cold feeling was spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the weather. We kept hiking toward where the hunters were supposed to be camped. The snow kept falling, and somewhere in the white silence ahead of us, I started to understand that this wasn't going to be a normal rescue. The hollow was waiting. We found their camp just before noon, or what was left of it. The orange tent was still standing, but barely. One wall had been torn open from the outside, not cut with a knife, torn, like something with claws had ripped through the fabric. Snow had blown inside, covering everything in white. "Hello," I called out. "Forest Service. Anyone here?" Nothing but wind through the trees. Angela was already checking inside the tent. "David, you need to see this." I crawled through the torn opening. The inside looked like a tornado had hit it. Sleeping bags scattered everywhere, gear thrown around. But it was the food that got my attention. Every single package of food was gone. Not just taken, the wrappers were torn apart like wild animals had gotten to them. But animals don't usually unzip tent doors first. "Where are their guns?" Angela asked. Good question. 4 hunters, but no rifles anywhere in the tent. I started looking around outside while Angela checked for any notes or signs of where they might have gone. The snow made tracking hard, but I found something about 50 yards from the tent. Boot prints, 4 different sizes, just like you'd expect from 4 hunters. But they were weird. The prints started together, like the group was walking close. Then they spread out, way out. I followed one set of tracks to the north. Normal walking pattern for about 100 yards. Then the prints changed. They got shorter, closer together, like the person was running, or being chased. The tracks led to a big oak tree. Behind it, I found more torn clothing, and blood in the snow. Not much, but enough to make my hands shake as I called Angela over. "We need to radio this in," she said when she saw the blood. I was about to agree when we heard it. A sound that made us both freeze. Somewhere in the trees ahead of us, something was crunching through the snow, heavy footsteps, but wrong somehow. Too careful, too quiet for something that big. "Hello?" I called. "Forest Service. Are you hurt?" The footsteps stopped. Angela and I looked at each other. In 16 years of rescues, I'd never had someone hide from us. People lost in the woods are usually happy to see rangers. "Sir, we're here to help," Angela tried. "Are you one of the hunters from Pittsburgh?" Still nothing, but I could feel something watching us. You know that feeling when eyes are on you? It was like that, but stronger. Like being watched by something very patient and very hungry. The footsteps started again, but moving away now, deeper into the trees. "Should we follow?" Angela whispered. Every instinct I had said no. But 4 people were missing, probably hurt. It was my job to find them. "Stay close," I said, "and keep your radio ready." We followed the sound through the trees. The snow was deeper here, nearly up to our waists in places. Whatever we were following was strong enough to push through it without much trouble. After about 10 minutes, the footsteps stopped again. We stopped too, listening. The silence in the woods was complete now. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Just the soft whisper of falling snow. That's when I saw it. About 30 feet ahead, something was hanging from a tree branch. At first I thought it was just a piece of torn fabric caught in the wind. Then I realized it was a hunting jacket, orange, like hunters wear. We got closer. The jacket was hung carefully on the branch, not caught there by accident. Inside the pockets, we found a wallet. James Morrison, age 42, from Pittsburgh, one of our missing hunters. But no James Morrison. "David," Angela said, and her voice was very quiet. "Look up." I looked up into the tree branches. About 15 feet overhead, carved into the trunk, were marks. Not random scratches, deliberate cuts that looked almost like letters or symbols. And below the carved marks, hanging from a smaller branch, was something that made my blood turn cold. A human finger, fresh enough that it hadn't frozen yet. Angela was already on her radio, calling for backup and a crime scene team. But I kept staring at that finger and at those marks carved in the tree, because now I was remembering the stories my grandmother used to tell. Stories about the families who disappeared in the 1,930 seconds. Stories about what people did when they got hungry enough. Stories about the ones who never came back down from the mountains. Something moved in the trees behind us. Big and careful and very, very quiet. We weren't rescuing anybody. We were being hunted. The backup never came. We waited by our truck for 2 hours, but the radio only gave us static. The storm had knocked out communication with the outside world. We were on our own with whatever was hunting in these woods. "We should go back," Angela said. "Get help." I wanted to agree. Every part of me wanted to get in that truck and drive away from Hunger Hollow as fast as possible. But 4 people were still missing. Maybe hurt, maybe worse. I couldn't just leave them. "One more search," I said. "If we don't find anything in an hour, we head back." Angela didn't look happy, but she nodded. We went back to the torn tent and started following a different set of tracks. These led east, toward the old Peterson homestead. I'd been there once before. Years ago. Nothing left but stone foundations, and a root cellar dug into the hillside. The tracks were strange. Sometimes they looked normal, like a person walking through snow. Other times they looked different. Longer steps, deeper prints. Like whatever we were following had changed how it moved. "David," Angela said when we'd been walking about 20 minutes. "Do you smell that?" I stopped and sniffed. There was something on the wind, sweet and rotten at the same time. Like meat that had gone bad. The smell got stronger as we got closer to the Peterson place. When we came over a small hill, we could see the old stone foundation poking through the snow. But something was wrong with the scene. Smoke was rising from the ground near the foundation. Not much, just a thin line of gray against the white sky, like someone had a small fire going underground. "The root cellar," I whispered. We approached carefully. The old cellar entrance was a wooden door set into the hillside, almost hidden by snow and dead vines. But the door was open, just a crack. That's where the smoke was coming from, and that's where the smell was strongest. "Hello?" I called softly. "Anyone down there?" A voice answered from the darkness below. Weak, scared. "Help, please help me." It was a man's voice, one of the missing hunters. Angela and I looked at each other. This was what we'd been looking for. But something felt wrong about the whole situation. Why would someone be hiding in an old root cellar? And what was that smell? "We're Forest Service," I called down. "We're coming to get you." "No," the voice said, suddenly sharp with fear. "Don't, they'll hear you." "Who will hear us?" But there was no answer. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it down into the cellar. Stone walls, dirt floor. In the back corner, I could see someone huddled against the wall. A man in hunting clothes, but I couldn't see his face. "Are you hurt?" Angela called down. "They took the others," the man said. His voice was strange, like he was talking through a mouth full of something. "Took them to the deep cave. For winter storage. Winter storage." The words made my skin crawl. "Who took them?" I asked. "The hungry ones, the ones who never came down from the mountain." Angela grabbed my arm. "David, we need to get out of here." But before I could answer, I heard something that made my heart stop. Footsteps in the snow behind us, multiple sets, moving quiet and careful through the trees. We were surrounded. I turned around slowly. At first I didn't see anything. Then shapes started moving between the trees. People, but wrong somehow. Too thin, too pale. Moving like animals that had learned to walk upright. "The cellar," I whispered to Angela. "Get in the cellar." But when I turned back to the entrance, the man who'd been calling for help was gone. Vanished, like he'd never been there at all. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear breathing now, heavy and wet. And underneath it all, a sound that made my teeth ache. The sound of teeth grinding together. "This way," Angela said, pointing toward a thick stand of pine trees. We ran. Behind us, I heard sounds that weren't quite human. Voices, but wrong. Calling to each other in words I didn't understand. Hunting calls. We crashed through the trees, snow flying everywhere. Branches tore at our clothes and faces. The sounds behind us were getting closer. Angela tripped and went down hard. I helped her up, and that's when I saw her ankle was twisted. "I can't run," she gasped. The hunting calls were very close now. I could hear individual voices, 3, maybe 4 of them, coming through the trees like they knew exactly where we were. That's when I remembered something my grandfather had told me about the old families, about what they'd done to survive the hungry winters. They'd learned to hunt people, and we were their prey. I half carried Angela through the trees until we found a small cave hidden behind some fallen rocks. It wasn't much, but it was shelter, and right now, shelter meant staying alive. "What are those things?" Angela whispered as I helped her inside. I was starting to have an idea, but it was too crazy to say out loud. Instead, I focused on her ankle. Twisted, maybe sprained, but not broken. "Can you walk?" "Not far." Outside the cave, the hunting calls had stopped. That was worse than hearing them. It meant whatever was out there was close enough that they didn't need to coordinate anymore. I peered out through a gap in the rocks. The woods looked empty, but I knew better. They were out there, watching, waiting. "David," Angela said quietly. "In the cellar, that man who was calling for help, did you see his face?" "No." "Why?" "Because I don't think he was asking us for help. I think he was calling for help from them." The cold feeling in my chest got worse. Because she was right. The voice had been too calm, too practiced. Like bait. That's when I heard my name being called. David Hollowtree. The voice came from right outside our hiding spot. An old woman's voice, cracked and dry. "I know you're in there, David. I know your family." My blood turned to ice water. "Your grandfather sold us food during the hungry winter. Salt, pork, and cornmeal when everyone else was dying. Good man, your grandfather." I knew that voice. I'd heard it in dreams sometimes, in memories I thought were just childhood nightmares. "Aunt Mary?" I whispered. Angela stared at me. "You know her?" "Aunt Mary Peterson, my grandfather's sister. She disappeared in 1932 with her whole family when I was just a baby. Everyone said they'd moved to the city. Everyone lied. Come out, David. Come out and see what we've become." Against every instinct screaming in my head, I pushed aside the rocks and stepped outside. Angela tried to stop me, but I had to see. She stood about 10 feet away in the snow, still recognizable as Aunt Mary, but changed. Thin like a starving person, but strong-looking too. Her skin was pale gray, almost white. Her teeth were yellow and filed to points. And she wasn't alone. 3 others stood with her. 2 men and a woman, all changed the same way. All watching me with hungry eyes that held too much intelligence. 46 years we've been up here," Aunt Mary said. 46 winters. Do you know what we learned, David? I couldn't speak. We learned that meat is meat, and some meat lasts longer than others. One of the men stepped forward. I recognized him too, though it took me a moment. Uncle Robert, Aunt Mary's husband. In his arms, he carried something wrapped in an old hunting jacket. "Fresh meat spoils too quick in summer," he said. "But winter keeps things nice." He unwrapped the bundle. It was part of a human leg. "The hunters were stupid," Aunt Mary said. "Walked right into our hollow-like presence. We took 3 of them already, stored them proper in the deep cave." "Where's the 4th one?" I managed to ask. She smiled, showing those pointed teeth. "He's helping us hunt. Amazing what people will do when you promise not to eat them right away." That explained the voice in the cellar. The 4th hunter, calling for help to lure us in. "Now, David," Aunt Mary said, stepping closer. "You got 2 choices. You can join the family business, like your grandfather did. Help us hunt, help us store meat for winter. And the other choice? You become the meat." Behind me, I heard Angela trying to move quietly back into the cave. But Uncle Robert heard her too. "The woman can't walk far," he said. "She'll be tender." Something snapped inside me then. 16 years of being a ranger, of helping people, of protecting these mountains. I wasn't going to let these things hurt Angela. I grabbed the emergency flare from my belt and pulled the trigger. Bright red light exploded between us, and the creatures screamed and covered their eyes. 46 years of living in caves had made them sensitive to sudden light. "Run!" I yelled to Angela. But she was already moving, hobbling as fast as she could through the trees. I followed, firing another flare behind us to keep the creatures back. We made it maybe 100 yards before we heard them coming after us. They moved through the snow like it was nothing, making sounds like wolves, but worse. Angela stumbled and fell again. This time I knew we weren't getting back up. "David," she gasped, "the emergency supplies. In your pack." I'd forgotten about the thermite charge. Standard equipment for extreme rescue situations, designed to melt through ice or create emergency heat. But it could do other things too. The creatures were almost on us when I pulled out the charge and the timer. 30 seconds. I grabbed Angela's hand and pulled her behind a large tree. "What are you doing?" "Ending this." I could hear Aunt Mary calling my name again, getting closer. 20 seconds. "David, you can't fight what we've become. We're family." 10 seconds. "Family doesn't eat family," I said. The thermite charge went off like a small sun. The heat was incredible, even from behind the tree. When the light faded and I looked around the tree, there was nothing left where the creatures had been standing, except melted snow and steam. But I knew it wasn't over. Aunt Mary had mentioned a deep cave, more of them, and somewhere up there, the 4th hunter was still alive, helping them hunt. The snow was still falling. Winter was just getting started, and I was beginning to understand why my grandfather never talked about the hungry years. We made it back to the truck just as the snow stopped falling. Angela's ankle was in bad shape, but she could walk with help. I radioed for emergency medical as soon as we got in range. The official report said, "We found evidence of a bear attack. 4 hunters killed by a large predator during an unusual early blizzard. The bodies were never recovered. Bears sometimes drag prey to caves to store for winter." That was the story, anyway. I never told anyone about Aunt Mary and the others. Who would believe it? And some stories are too dangerous to share. But I made sure the area around Hunger Hollow was permanently closed to hunting. Posted new signs. Got the state to declare it a protected habitat. Angela transferred to a different forest after her ankle healed. She never talked about what we saw up there, but sometimes I catch her looking at missing person reports from remote areas. I think she's watching for patterns. I stayed. Someone has to watch the hollow, because the deep cave is still out there, and winter comes every year. 3 months after the incident, I was going through my grandfather's things in the attic. Found an old journal from the 1930 seconds. Most of it was normal stuff. Weather, farm work, family news. But there were entries about the hungry winter, about families disappearing into the mountains, and about the deliveries. Salt pork and cornmeal, just like Aunt Mary said. My grandfather had traded with the Peterson family all through that winter, even after people started whispering about what they'd become. The last entry was from spring of 1932. Delivered the last of the salt pork to Mary's people up in the hollow. They're changed now, too changed to come back down. But they remember kindness. They remember family. God help us all, they remember family. I burned the journal that night, but I kept one page. The one with a list of other families who'd made deliveries to the hollow during the hungry winter. Names I recognized from tombstones around town. Good people who'd helped monsters survive. Some of their grandchildren still live here. I wonder sometimes if any of them know the family business they inherited. I wonder if any of them still make deliveries when the snow gets deep enough. Last week, I found fresh tire tracks leading up toward the old Peterson place. Someone had been driving supplies up there after the first big snow of the season. I followed the tracks as far as I could on foot. They led to a cave entrance I'd never seen before. A wooden sign hung next to the entrance, carved with words that made my hands shake. Winter storage. Hollow Tree Family Business, Est, 1932. The snow is getting deeper every day. Soon the hollow will be cut off again, like it is every winter. And somewhere up there, in the deep caves, hungry things are waiting for fresh meat to wander into their territory. I've put in for a transfer to a different forest, someplace warmer where winter doesn't last so long. But I don't think they'll let me leave. After all, I'm family, and family takes care of family. The snow keeps falling. My name is William Shadowbrook, and I've been a park ranger for 19 years. People always ask about the weird stuff you see out in the wilderness, and most of the time I just smile and change the subject. But what happened in October of 1983 changed everything I thought I knew about the world. I work in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, specifically around the Cataract Falls region in Tennessee. It's beautiful country, but it's also old, really old. The Cherokee called this place home for thousands of years before anyone else showed up, and some of their sacred sites are still scattered throughout my patrol area. Before I became a ranger, I studied anthropology in college. I thought I was pretty smart about Native American culture and folklore. I'd read all the books, written papers about Cherokee traditions, even helped document some of their sacred sites for the Park Service. Looking back, I realize I didn't understand anything at all. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in late October. Dispatch told me someone had reported suspicious activity near the old waterfall site up on Bear Creek Trail. That trail isn't marked on any tourist maps. It's one of those places only locals know about, and most of them stay away. What kind of suspicious activity? I asked, grabbing my radio and gear. Group of people doing some kind of ceremony, the dispatcher said. Caller said they were dressed up like Indians, dancing around the falls. My stomach dropped. The waterfall at the end of Bear Creek Trail sits in the middle of what used to be a Cherokee sacred site. The tribal council had asked us to keep people away from there, especially white folks trying to play Indian with ceremonies they didn't understand. I drove my truck as far as the old logging road would take me, then hiked the rest of the way. The trail winds through thick forest for about 2 miles before you hear the sound of falling water. As I got closer, I could smell something strange in the air, like burning sage mixed with something else I couldn't place. The waterfall is beautiful, I'll give it that. Water drops about 30 feet over smooth black rocks into a pool that's so clear you can see straight to the bottom. Ancient trees grow right up to the edge, their roots twisted around boulders that have been there since before humans walked the earth. But what I saw when I reached the clearing made my blood run cold. 7 people sat in a perfect circle around the pool, all wearing what looked like Cherokee clothing, feathers, beadwork, the whole deal. At first I thought they were meditating or something. Then I realized they weren't moving at all. Not breathing, not blinking, nothing. "Hey," I called out, "this is a restricted area." No response. I got closer and saw that their eyes were wide open, staring at something I couldn't see. A woman with long gray hair had her hands raised like she was reaching for something. A young man with a scraggly beard sat with his mouth open mid-word. They were arranged in the exact pattern I'd seen in Cherokee petroglyphs, the sacred dance formation that was supposed to open doorways between worlds. I checked for pulses. Everyone was alive, but barely there. It was like their minds had just left. That's when I noticed the ground around them. The earth was worn smooth in strange patterns, like people had been dancing there for hours. But these folks were clearly city types, soft hands, expensive hiking boots, the kind of people who'd never danced on dirt in their lives. I radioed for backup and medical assistance, then sat down to wait. That's when I heard the singing. It was faint at first, like wind through the trees. But as I listened, I could make out voices. Old voices. Singing in a language I'd studied but never heard spoken. Cherokee words, but older than anything in the books. The singing was coming from the waterfall. I walked to the edge of the pool and looked down into the clear water. For just a second, I could swear I saw faces looking back at me, not reflections, but actual faces under the water. Old faces with sad eyes. Then the wind picked up, and when I looked again, there was nothing there but rocks and water. The medical team arrived an hour later, followed by my supervisor and a liaison from the Cherokee Nation named Joseph Ravensong. Joseph was about my age, with long black hair and the kind of serious expression that told you he'd seen things that would give other people nightmares. While the paramedics checked on the unconscious people, Joseph and I walked around the site. He moved slowly, studying the worn patterns in the earth. "How long have they been here?" he asked. "Found them about an hour ago. Caller reported seeing them this morning around dawn." Joseph knelt down and ran his fingers along one of the smooth paths in the dirt. "This ground's been danced on for a lot longer than one morning." "What do you mean?" He stood up and looked at me with dark eyes that seemed older than his face. "You know what this place is, right?" "What it was?" I nodded. "Cherokee Sacred Site. Used to be a gathering place." "Not just any gathering place." Joseph walked over to the waterfall. "This is where they held the ghost dance ceremonies for the people who died on the Trail of Tears. Families would come here to call back the spirits of relatives who died during the forced march." I felt a chill run down my spine. "That's just folklore, though. Legend." Joseph looked at me like I'd just said something incredibly stupid. "You think those people over there arranged themselves in a perfect ceremonial pattern by accident? You think this ground wore smooth in one morning?" Before I could answer, one of the unconscious people started moving. The gray-haired woman began swaying back and forth, still sitting in the same spot. Her eyes were still wide open, but now she was humming something low and rhythmic. Then the man next to her joined in, then another. "What are they doing?" I whispered to Joseph. "Dancing," he said quietly. "Even sitting down, they're dancing." The humming got louder, and I realized it matched the singing I'd heard from the waterfall earlier. But these people were white, suburban types who probably learned about Cherokee culture from movies. How did they know these songs? The paramedic working on the woman suddenly stepped back. "That's weird." "What's weird?" I asked. Her pulse just went from almost nothing to perfectly normal, like someone flipped a switch. One by one, the 7 people began moving in slow, synchronized motions. Still sitting, still humming, but now their arms moved in patterns that looked like dancing. Joseph grabbed my arm. "We need to get everyone away from here. Right now." "Why? They're waking up. Isn't that good? Look at their feet." I looked down. Even though they were sitting, all 7 people were moving their feet like they were doing steps. Complex steps that required them to know exactly where the others were without looking. "How are they doing that?" I asked. "They're not," Joseph said. "Something else is." The wind picked up again, and this time I could hear it clearly. Voices in the wind, dozens of them, all singing the same song the unconscious people were humming. The temperature dropped at least 10 degrees in seconds. "Everyone back to the trucks," I ordered. "Now." But as we started moving the people, they stood up. All 7 of them, at exactly the same time, still humming, still moving in perfect sync. Their eyes were focused on something behind us. I turned around and saw figures standing at the edge of the waterfall. They looked like people at first, men and women in traditional Cherokee dress. But they were see-through, like looking at someone through smoke, and they were dancing. "Oh hell," Joseph breathed. "They actually did it." "Did what?" "Opened the door." The ghostly figures moved with fluid grace, their feet never quite touching the ground. As they danced, more appeared. Soon there were dozens of them, all performing the same complex steps around the waterfall. The 7 living people began walking toward them. "Stop," I shouted, but they didn't even slow down. They walked straight to the pool and stepped into the water, still humming, still moving in those impossible synchronized patterns. The water should have been freezing. It was October in the mountains. But steam rose from the pool as the people waded deeper, like the water was suddenly hot. "We have to stop them," I said, starting toward the pool. Joseph grabbed my arm. "Don't. If you step into that dance, you might not come back out." "What do you mean?" "Those spirits have been waiting here for over a century. They've been trying to finish a ceremony that was interrupted when their people were forced to leave. These folks accidentally gave them away to complete it." One of the 7 people, a young woman in expensive hiking clothes, was now waist-deep in the water. The ghostly dancers surrounded her, and for a moment she looked confused, like she was waking up from a dream. "Help me," she screamed, suddenly aware of where she was. "I can't stop moving." Her legs kept dancing underwater, while her upper body struggled against whatever force was controlling her. The other 6 were moving deeper into the pool, some of them starting to panic as they realized they weren't in control of their own bodies. "Do something," I yelled at Joseph. "I can't just stop it," he said. "The ceremony has to be completed or countered. Those spirits have been trapped here since 1838, and they're not going to let this chance pass." The ghostly dancers began moving faster. The living people in the water matched their pace exactly, even though some of them were now crying and begging for help. The water around them started glowing with a soft, blue light. I'd seen enough supernatural movies to know this wasn't going to end well. "How do we counter it?" "I'd need someone who knows the traditional closing dance," Joseph said. "And they'd have to perform it perfectly, or what? Or those 7 people become permanent vessels for the spirits, and the door between worlds stays open forever." That's when the woman screamed again. But this time, it wasn't her voice. It was the voice of someone else, someone older, speaking in Cherokee. The woman's face had changed too. She looked older, sadder, and her eyes held knowledge that hadn't been there before. "She's being possessed," Joseph said. "They all are." One by one, the other 6 people in the water began speaking in voices that weren't their own. Old voices, speaking in a language most of them probably didn't even know existed. The ghostly dancers around the pool moved faster and faster. With each step, they became more solid, more real. And with each step, the living people in the water became more like ghosts. "This is really happening, isn't it?" I said. "Spirits and ghosts and all of it." Joseph nodded. "My grandmother told stories about this place. She said the spirits of the people who died on the Trail of Tears never left. They'd been waiting here, trying to finish their last dance. What was the dance supposed to do? Bring their people back home. All of them." I looked around the clearing. If this ceremony worked the way it was supposed to, we weren't just looking at 7 possessed hikers. We were looking at the possible return of thousands of Cherokee spirits who died during the forced relocation. The water in the pool began to swirl, creating a whirlpool with the 7 people at the center. They were still dancing, still speaking in voices that weren't their own. But now they were sinking. "How long do we have?" I asked. "Until sunset," Joseph said, looking at the sky. "When the sun goes down, the ceremony completes, and they're gone forever." I checked my watch. 3 hours. 3 hours to figure out how to save 7 people from a supernatural force I'd never believed in until 20 minutes ago. The singing from the waterfall got louder, and more ghostly figures appeared around the clearing. They weren't just Cherokee now. I could see faces from different time periods, all connected to this place somehow. "Joseph," I said quietly, "exactly how many spirits are we dealing with here?" He looked around at the growing crowd of transparent figures, all moving to the same ancient rhythm. "All of them," he said. The sun was starting to sink toward the mountains when more people arrived. I'd called for backup, but what I got was a whole team of federal agents, park supervisors, and someone from the Smithsonian who kept taking pictures of everything. "Clear the area," the lead agent ordered. "We're treating this as a potential chemical contamination." "It's not chemicals," I said. It's what? Ranger Shadowbrook? Mass hallucination? Swamp gas?" I looked at Joseph, who just shrugged. "How do you explain to a federal agent that you're watching a century-old Cherokee ghost dance ceremony?" The 7 people in the pool were now completely underwater, but somehow still dancing. You could see them through the clear water, moving in slow, graceful patterns while the ghostly figures above them danced faster and faster. "Sir," one of the junior agents called out, "the water temperature is 98 degrees. That's impossible for a mountain pool in October." "Equipment malfunction," the lead agent said, but I could see doubt creeping into his eyes. That's when the first agent disappeared. Agent Morrison was standing at the edge of the pool, taking water samples, when something grabbed his ankle. 1 second he was there, the next he was gone, pulled straight down into the water without even a splash. "Morrison!" the lead agent shouted. "Where the hell is Morrison?" We could see him underwater, but he wasn't drowning. He was dancing with the other 7, his business suit somehow transformed into traditional Cherokee clothing. His face had the same empty expression as the others. "Okay," the lead agent said, backing away from the pool. "Maybe we need to reconsider our approach here." But it was too late. The ghostly dancers around the clearing were becoming more solid with each step. I could see details now, facial expressions, individual pieces of clothing, even scars and tattoos. These weren't vague spirits anymore. They were people, dead people who wanted to be alive again. Joseph stepped close to me. "We need to start the counter ceremony now, before they get strong enough to force more people into the dance." "I thought you said you needed someone who knew the traditional steps." "I do." He looked at me seriously. "You're going to have to learn them." "Me? I don't know anything about Cherokee dancing." "You know more than you think. All those sites you documented, all that research you did, you've been studying this your whole career. The movements are in the ground patterns you measured. The steps are in the petroglyphs you photographed. I thought about all the academic work I'd done over the years, all the sacred sites I'd cataloged and measured. At the time, I thought I was preserving history. Now I realized I might have been preparing for this moment." "How long will it take?" I asked. "To learn the dance?" "About an hour." "To perform it?" Joseph looked at the sky. "We'll have one chance when the moon rises. If we mess up, 8 people become permanent ghost hosts, and we have a supernatural disaster on our hands. At minimum." One of the federal agents was setting up some kind of electronic equipment near the pool. The moment he turned it on, sparks shot out and the machine started smoking. "Electronic interference," he reported. "Massive electromagnetic disturbance centered on the water." The ghostly dancers seemed to like that. They moved faster, and with each step, more living people started swaying in place. The other agents, the park supervisors, even the guy from the Smithsonian, they were all beginning to move to the rhythm of the dance. "It's spreading," I said. Joseph nodded grimly. "The longer the ceremony goes on, the stronger it gets. Eventually, everyone in the area will be pulled into it." "How big of an area are we talking about?" "I don't know. My grandmother's stories never covered anything this large." The lead agent was now moving his feet in small, precise steps while he tried to radio for more backup. He didn't seem to realize he was doing it. "Agent Collins," I called out. "You might want to step back from the pool." "What? Why?" But even as he asked, his body was turning toward the water. "Because you're about to go for a swim," Joseph said. Collins looked down at his feet in confusion. He was doing a complicated step pattern, moving steadily toward the pool. "What the hell is happening to me?" "Fight it," I told him. "Think about something else. Anything else." But Collins kept dancing toward the water, his face showing the same blank expression I'd seen on the others. 2 more agents were moving the same way, their bodies controlled by a rhythm they couldn't hear but couldn't resist. "We're losing them," Joseph said. "We need to start the counter ceremony now." "But you said I needed an hour to learn it." "Plans change." Joseph began moving in a different pattern. Not the same dance as the spirits, but something that moved against their rhythm. As he danced, the ghostly figures around the clearing turned to look at him. They didn't look happy. "Follow my movements exactly," Joseph called over the increasing wind. "Don't improvise, don't hesitate. If you break the pattern, we lose everything." I tried to copy his steps, but it was harder than it looked. The dance required precise timing, specific foot placement, and a rhythm that seemed to fight against everything the spirits were doing. The ghostly Cherokee dancers began moving toward us. "They don't want us to complete the closing ceremony," Joseph explained, still dancing. "They've been waiting too long for this chance." One of the spirit dancers reached out and touched Agent Collins as he walked by. The moment the ghostly hand made contact, Collins stopped walking toward the pool and started dancing with them instead. "That's not good," I said. "No, it's really not." More spirits were approaching. I could see the individual faces now, men, women, children, all wearing expressions of desperate hope. They'd been trapped in this place for over a century, unable to move on, unable to go home. This ceremony was their only chance at peace. But if they completed it, 8 innocent people would pay the price. I feel sorry for them, I admitted, still trying to follow Joseph's dance steps. So do I, he said. But feeling sorry won't help anyone if we can't close this properly. A ghostly woman reached toward me, her face pleading. For a moment, I hesitated. These people had suffered so much. They'd been forced from their homes, marched hundreds of miles, and died far from everything they loved. Didn't they deserve a chance to come back? That moment of hesitation almost cost us everything. The spirit woman's hand touched my shoulder, and suddenly I wasn't in the clearing anymore. I was on a muddy trail in winter, surrounded by sick and dying people. I could feel their hunger, their exhaustion, their despair. I was experiencing the trail of tears through the eyes of someone who had lived it. William, Joseph's voice seemed to come from very far away. Don't let them pull you in. I fought to remember where I really was, when I really was. The vision was so real I could smell the wood smoke and feel the cold rain. But I forced myself to focus on Joseph's voice, on the dance steps he'd taught me. The ghostly woman's hand passed through my shoulder as I resumed the counter pattern. Good, Joseph called. Keep dancing. No matter what they show you, keep dancing. But the spirits weren't giving up. More of them approached, each one trying to touch us, to share their memories, to make us understand their pain. With each contact, I saw flashes of their lives, the beautiful homeland they'd lost, the promises that were broken, the loved ones who died on the trail. It would have been so easy to stop dancing and let them have their chance at peace. The problem was, I could also see what would happen if they succeeded. The 8 people in the pool weren't just being possessed, they were being replaced. If the ceremony completed, those spirits would have permanent bodies and the original souls would be gone forever. How much longer? I called to Joseph. Until moonrise, maybe 20 minutes. In the pool, the 8 people were now glowing with that same blue light as the water around them. Agent Morrison caught my eye through the water and mouthed the word help. 20 minutes to save 8 people from a fate worse than death. The ghostly dancers formed a circle around Joseph and me, all moving to the rhythm we were trying to disrupt. It was like trying to swim upstream in a river of supernatural energy. They're getting stronger, Joseph warned. When the moon comes up, they'll have enough power to force us to stop. I looked up at the sky. The moon was just beginning to show through the trees. Then we better finish this fast. The moment the moon cleared the tree line, everything changed. The ghostly dancers around us became completely solid. They weren't spirits anymore, they were people, as real and physical as Joseph and me. People who had been dead for 145 years, but who now had bodies again. The 8 people in the pool stopped glowing and started screaming. What's happening to them? I shouted over the sound of wind and water and supernatural energy crackling through the air. The spirits are taking over completely, Joseph called back, still maintaining his counterdance. We're out of time. The Cherokee dancers around us weren't moving to hurt us, they were just dancing, lost in a ceremony they'd been trying to complete for more than a century. But their dance was killing 8 innocent people. There has to be another way, I said. There is. Joseph's face was grim. But you're not going to like it. Tell me. Someone has to take their place. Someone has to willingly enter the pool and let the spirits complete the ceremony through them. If a person offers themselves freely, the spirits will release the others. I stared at him. That's suicide. Probably. What do you mean, probably? My grandmother said that sometimes, if the person offering themselves truly understood the spirit's pain, truly accepted responsibility for what happened to them, the spirits might find peace without needing a permanent host. Might? It's never been tested. In the pool, Agent Morrison was floating face down, but somehow still breathing. The others were arranged in a perfect circle underwater, all moving in synchronized patterns that looked like underwater ballet. How long do they have? I asked. Minutes. When the ceremony completes, their souls will be displaced forever. I looked around at the Cherokee dancers. Now that they were solid, I could see them clearly. Men, women, children, elders, whole families who had died together on the Trail of Tears. They weren't evil. They were just people who had suffered an unimaginable injustice and couldn't let go. And I had helped document the destruction of their sacred sites. I had contributed to the academic exploitation of their culture. In a way, I was part of the long line of people who had taken from them without permission. This is my fault, I said. What? All those years of research, cataloging their sacred sites, publishing papers about their culture, I never asked permission. I never thought about how they might feel about outsiders studying them like specimens. Joseph stopped dancing for a moment. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it should be me in that pool. William, no, there has to be another way. But I was already walking toward the water. The Cherokee dancers parted to let me pass, their eyes following me with something that might have been hope. The water was warm when I stepped in, blood temperature, like stepping into a bath. The 8 people floating around me looked up with eyes that weren't entirely their own. I'm sorry, I said to the spirits, to the water, to the mountain itself. I'm sorry for what was done to your people. I'm sorry for my part in it. If you need someone to complete your ceremony, take me instead. Let them go. The dancing around the pool stopped. Every Cherokee spirit turned to look at me. In the sudden silence, I could hear the water lapping against the rocks, my own heartbeat, and something else, voices whispering in a language I didn't understand. One of the spirits, an elderly woman with kind eyes, walked into the pool toward me. As she approached, I felt her memories flooding into my mind, not the traumatic ones this time, but the good ones. Her childhood in these mountains, the way the forest looked before the roads and tourist trails, the ceremonies that brought her people together in celebration and healing. She reached out and touched my forehead. Suddenly, I could understand the Cherokee language. I could feel the rhythm of their dances in my bones, the meaning behind every step and gesture. I knew how to complete the ceremony, but I also knew that completing it would mean staying here forever, becoming a guardian spirit for this place, watching over the sacred sites that had been entrusted to my care in life. Is that what you want? I asked her. She nodded, but then gestured to the 8 people floating around us. Asterisk, not them. Asterisk, her touch seemed to say. Asterisk, they don't belong here. But you understand. Asterisk. I looked up at Joseph, who was standing at the edge of the pool with tears in his eyes. Do it, he called. Save them. I took a deep breath and began to dance. The steps came naturally now, as if I'd known them my whole life. As I moved, the 8 people around me began to rise toward the surface. Their eyes cleared, their breathing returned to normal. One by one, they swam to the edge of the pool and climbed out, gasping and shaking but alive. The Cherokee spirits around the clearing began to glow with soft, golden light. Thank you, the elderly woman whispered, her voice clear in my mind. We can rest now. Will I see my family again? I asked. If I stay? She smiled. This isn't an ending. It's a different kind of service. As the last of the rescued people climbed out of the pool, the Cherokee spirits began to fade. But they weren't disappearing. They were moving on, finally able to leave this place and find peace. The elderly woman was the last to go. You don't have to stay, she said. Your willingness to sacrifice yourself broke the cycle. We can leave knowing someone understands our pain and will protect this place properly. But I want to stay, I realized. This is where I belong. She smiled again. Then you'll make a good guardian. The golden light surrounding her began to include me as well. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the rocky shore of the pool. Joseph was kneeling beside me, checking my pulse. How long was I out? I asked. About an hour. The spirits are gone. Everyone's safe. I sat up slowly and looked around. The clearing looked completely normal, just a waterfall, a pool, and trees. No ghostly dancers, no supernatural energy, no sign that anything unusual had ever happened here. Did they make it? The spirits? Joseph nodded. I could feel them leaving. They found peace. The 8 people who had been trapped in the ceremony were sitting nearby, wrapped in blankets and being checked by paramedics. Agent Morrison caught my eye and nodded gratefully. They all remembered what had happened, but they were alive and free. So why am I not a guardian spirit? I asked. Because you made the choice freely, Joseph explained. The spirits weren't looking for slaves or victims. They just needed someone to acknowledge their suffering and show respect for their sacred places. Your willingness to sacrifice yourself was enough. I stood up and walked to the edge of the pool. The water was clear and normal temperature again, just a regular mountain pool fed by a waterfall. But I could feel something different about it, a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. What happens now? I asked. Now you go back to being a park ranger, Joseph said, but with a better understanding of what you're protecting. Over the next few weeks, I filed reports that mentioned equipment malfunctions and possible gas leaks from underground sources. Nobody questioned the official story. The 8 people who had been in the pool were all examined by doctors and declared perfectly healthy, with no memory of how they'd ended up underwater. But things were different for me. I started working more closely with the tribal council, getting proper permission before documenting sacred sites. I learned to speak Cherokee, not from books this time, but from Joseph and other tribal members who became my teachers. I began to understand the difference between studying a culture and respecting it. Most importantly, I knew my real job now wasn't just protecting the park's natural resources. I was protecting places where the physical and spiritual worlds touched, where the past and present met, where healing was possible if you approached with the right intentions. 6 months after the incident, I was walking the trail near Cataract Falls when I heard singing again. Not the desperate, hungry voices I'd heard before, but something peaceful and grateful. I looked toward the waterfall and saw a brief shimmer in the mist. Not spirits trapped between worlds, but ancestors, checking on their sacred places and finding them properly cared for. I touched the small medicine pouch Joseph had given me, a sign of my acceptance into the community I'd once studied from the outside. "You're welcome," I whispered to the mist. The singing faded, but the peace remained. I've been back to that pool dozens of times since then. Sometimes tourists find their way to the waterfall despite the unmarked trail, and I guide them back to the main paths. Sometimes researchers want to study the site, and I make sure they understand the proper protocols first. And sometimes, late at night when the moon is full, I sit by the water and remember the elderly spirit woman's words about different kinds of service. I'm still a park ranger, but now I know that some of the things I'm protecting can't be measured or cataloged or explained in official reports. Some things can only be honored. My name is Marcus Ironbound, and I've been a ranger for 15 years now. People think that's a funny last name for someone who works in the woods, but it makes perfect sense when you know my story. My daddy worked the steel mills before I was born, and that iron got into our family's blood. When he died in a mill accident, machinery that couldn't possibly malfunction, according to the safety reports, I swore I'd spend my life keeping people safe from industrial dangers. Now I work the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee, specializing in hazardous materials and industrial site safety. Most folks don't realize how much old industry is scattered through these mountains. Abandoned mines, forgotten foundries, rusted equipment left to rot when the companies moved on. My job is making sure hikers and campers don't stumble into something that could hurt them. I thought I knew every danger these mountains could throw at me. Chemical leaks, unstable structures, toxic soil, I'd seen it all. What I hadn't counted on was machinery that could think for itself. It was October 1981 when everything changed. The acid rain had been particularly bad that season, eating away at the old ironworks faster than usual. I was assigned to check on the abandoned Cherokee Ironworks up on Iron Mountain, a massive complex that had been shut down since the 1922. The state wanted an environmental impact survey done before they decided whether to clean up the site or just seal it off permanently. The survey team had been up there for 3 days when they stopped checking in. Dr. Sarah Chen, the team leader, was supposed to radio in every 12 hours. When we lost contact for more than 24 hours, my supervisor sent me up to investigate. I'd been to the ironworks before, but never alone. The place had always given me the creeps. All that rusted machinery, standing silent like metal tombstones. Local families had been telling stories about the place for generations. They called them iron spirits, and said the mountain itself had been poisoned by all the mining and smelting that went on there for decades. My grandmother used to say, the workers who died in those industrial accidents never really left. Their souls got mixed up with the molten iron somehow, trapped in the very metal they'd worked with their whole lives. I always figured it was just mountain folklore, the kind of stories people tell to keep their kids away from dangerous places. The drive up took 2 hours on winding forest roads. As I got higher up the mountain, I started noticing things that didn't seem right. The trees closest to the ironworks looked sick, not just from acid rain, but like something was draining the life right out of them. Their leaves had turned a rusty brown color, even though it was still early fall. When I finally reached the main gate of the ironworks, I found Dr. Chen's team van parked outside, but no sign of the team. The gate was standing wide open, which was strange because I'd helped install new locks on it just last month. The chain had been cut clean through, but the metal looked like it had been heated to white-hot temperatures and then cooled quickly. No bolt cutters could have made a cut that smooth. I radioed back to headquarters and told them I was going in to look for the survey team. My supervisor reminded me to follow standard hazmat protocols: full protective gear, air monitoring equipment, emergency beacon. I suited up and checked my instruments. Everything was reading normal. No toxic gases, no unusual radiation, no chemical leaks detected. But as I walked through that gate and into the ironworks proper, every instinct I'd developed in 15 years of ranger work started screaming that something was very, very wrong. The Cherokee Ironworks covered about 50 acres of mountainside, with the main foundry building rising 5 stories into the gray October sky. Smaller structures were scattered around it like metal mushrooms, forges, storage sheds, workers' quarters that had been abandoned so long they were more rust than building. What struck me first was how quiet it was. Not normal forest quiet, but the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. No birds, no insects, no wind through the trees. Just the sound of my own breathing inside the protective mask and the crunch of gravel under my boots. I followed the path the survey team would have taken, checking my scanner for any sign of their equipment. About 100 yards from the main foundry, I found the first piece. Dr. Chen's geological survey kit, scattered across the ground like someone had dropped it and run. But when I knelt down to examine it more closely, I saw something that made my blood go cold. The metal instruments, the calipers, the sample containers, even the steel clips on the notebooks had been crushed. Not bent or broken, but actually compressed into tight little balls of metal, like someone had squeezed them in a giant's fist. The force required to do that would be enormous, and I couldn't think of any machinery on the site that was still operational. I radioed in my findings and continued deeper into the complex. The path led toward the main foundry, where the real ironworking had been done. As I got closer, I started hearing sounds that didn't make sense. At first, it was just a low humming noise, like electrical equipment running. But the ironworks had been disconnected from the power grid for 60 years. Then, I heard what sounded like machinery operating, the rhythmic pounding of hammers, the whoosh of bellows feeding air to forges. Impossible sounds from equipment that couldn't possibly be working. I rounded the corner of the main foundry and saw something that stopped me in my tracks. The massive drop forge at the center of the building was moving. The enormous hammer, which had to weigh several tons, was rising and falling in a steady rhythm, striking the anvil below with tremendous force. But there were no power lines connected to it, no motor running, no operator controlling it. It was just working, like it had been doing every day for the past 60 years. And caught beneath that hammer was something that had once been a human being. I ran toward the forge, shouting into my radio for emergency medical support. But as I got closer, I realized there was nothing medical personnel could do. Dr. Chen's research assistant, a young man named David Park, was pinned under the hammer. The metal had somehow molded itself around his body, fusing with his flesh in ways that should have been instantly fatal. But his eyes were open, and they tracked my movement as I approached. His mouth moved, trying to form words, but no sound came out. Then I heard a voice that seemed to come from the machinery itself, speaking in David's tone, but with a strange metallic echo. Can't leave. The work must finish. The work. The hammer lifted again, and I could see that what remained of David had been partially incorporated into the metal of the anvil itself. His body was becoming part of the machine, and somehow, impossibly, he was still conscious. I grabbed a crowbar from a nearby tool rack and tried to pry him free. But the moment I touched the metal, an electric shock ran up my arms that had nothing to do with electricity. It was like touching the raw grief and pain of everyone who had ever been injured or killed in this place. The metal was alive with their memories, their suffering, their desperate need to keep working even in death. The forge hammer came down again, and David's eyes finally went blank. But as I stumbled backward, I heard other voices joining his. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all coming from the machinery around me. The entire foundry was speaking with the voices of dead workers, and they all had the same message. The work must continue, the work must never stop. Join us. Join us in the iron. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I dropped my equipment and ran back toward the gate as fast as my legs would carry me. While behind me, the sounds of impossible machinery grew louder and louder. The whole ironworks was coming to life, powered by something that had nothing to do with electricity or steam or anything I understood. But as I reached my truck and grabbed the radio to call for backup, I realized I had a bigger problem than just one dead survey team member. Because scattered around the entrance to the ironworks were 4 more sets of crushed survey equipment, and I could hear 4 more voices calling from different parts of the complex. Dr. Chen's entire team was still in there, and they were all still alive. I should have waited for backup. That's what the manual says, what 15 years of training had drilled into me. But I could hear those voices calling from the ironworks, and I knew that whatever was happening to Dr. Chen's team was going to get worse if I didn't act fast. I called in my location and requested immediate assistance, then grabbed my emergency kit and headed back through the gate. This time I was ready for what I might find, or at least I thought I was. The sounds of machinery had grown louder and more complex. It wasn't just the drop forge anymore. I could hear conveyor belts running, steam hammers pounding, the roar of furnaces that should have been cold for decades. The whole foundry complex was operating at full capacity. But there were no workers, no raw materials, no purpose for the production except the production itself. I followed the sound of Dr. Chen's voice toward the rolling mill, a long building where iron ingots would have been shaped into sheets and bars. As I got closer, I could make out what she was saying. Technical specifications, measurements, quality control reports. She was reciting the kind of information a supervisor would need to keep a mill running efficiently. I found her in the main rolling room, standing at a control panel that hadn't been functional since the Coolidge administration. Her hands moved over switches and levers that weren't connected to anything, but somehow the massive rolling machinery responded to her commands. Steel rollers the size of telephone poles turned in perfect synchronization, processing invisible raw materials into invisible finished products. But Dr. Chen herself was no longer entirely human. Her skin had taken on a metallic sheen, and when she turned to look at me, I could see that her eyes had changed color to the deep orange of heated iron. She spoke in her own voice, but with that same metallic undertone I'd heard from David. "Marcus," she said, "we've been waiting for you. The work requires proper supervision. Safety protocols must be maintained." She gestured toward the rolling mill, and I saw what she meant. The other 3 members of her team were positioned at different stations throughout the machinery. They were operating equipment with their bare hands, their bodies partially merged with the metal controls. One man's arm had become part of a gear assembly, turning with mechanical precision. A woman's torso had fused with a steam gauge, her chest rising and falling in rhythm with the pressure readings. They were all conscious, all aware, all continuing their professional duties, even as they became part of the machinery itself, and they seemed content. That was the most horrifying part. They'd found their purpose, their place in the great work of the Iron Mountain, and they were happy to serve. "You understand industrial safety, Doctor," Chen continued, her voice taking on an increasingly mechanical tone. "You know how important it is to prevent accidents. Help us make this place safe again. Help us finish the work." I backed away from her, but everywhere I turned, I found more impossibilities. Furnaces were burning without fuel, their flames fed by something that had nothing to do with coal or oil. The conveyor systems were moving massive ingots of iron that materialized out of thin air, then disappeared again after they'd been processed. It was like watching the ghost of the ironworks' productive years, when this place had employed hundreds of workers and turned out tons of finished iron every day. But as I watched, I began to understand what was really happening. The machinery wasn't just running randomly, it was performing the same tasks, in the same sequence, that had been done here decades ago. The spirits of the dead workers were recreating their daily routines, over and over, trying to complete work that had been interrupted by industrial accidents, cave-ins, toxic exposures, and all the other dangers that came with mining and metalwork in the early 1900s. They'd died on the job, and somehow their consciousness had been absorbed into the iron itself. Every piece of metal in the complex was infused with their memories, their skills, their desperate need to finish what they'd started. Death hadn't ended their workday. It had just changed the nature of their employment. I tried to radio for help again, but my equipment was dead. The electromagnetic fields generated by the supernatural machinery were interfering with all electrical devices. I was on my own, surrounded by the risen ghosts of industrial workers who wanted nothing more than to add me to their eternal workforce. That's when I heard a new sound from outside, a truck engine, getting closer. My backup had arrived, but they had no idea what they were walking into. I had to warn them, had to get them away from this place before they ended up like Dr. Chen's team. I ran toward the main entrance, but the machinery seemed to sense my intention. Conveyor belts shifted to block my path. Steam pipes burst open, filling the air with scalding vapor. The very building itself was trying to keep me from leaving, trying to force me to take my place in the production line. Behind me, I could hear Dr. Chen calling, "Don't fight it, Marcus. You know this work. Your father knew this work. Come home to the iron." And that's when I realized why this place had called to me specifically. It wasn't just because I was the ranger assigned to industrial safety. It was because my father's death in that steel mill accident hadn't been an accident at all. It had been a recruitment. And now it was my turn to join the family business. The truck outside belonged to Carol Steelwright, the industrial hygienist who'd been assigned to assist with the environmental survey. She was everything I wasn't: city-trained, book-smart, full of theories about proper hazmat procedures, but she was also the only backup available on short notice. And right now I was grateful for any help I could get. I managed to intercept her before she got too close to the main buildings. One look at my face told her something had gone seriously wrong. "What happened to the survey team?" she asked, pulling on her protective gear. "They're still alive," I said. "That's the problem." I gave her the short version as we approached the foundry complex, but I could tell she thought I was suffering from some kind of chemical exposure. Talking machines, workers fused with iron, supernatural production lines. It all sounded crazy until you saw it with your own eyes. The sounds of machinery had grown even louder while I was away. Now the entire complex was operating in perfect harmony, like a symphony orchestra made of steel and steam. But as we got closer to the main foundry, Carol's expression changed. Her instruments were picking up readings that didn't make sense. Massive electromagnetic disturbances, temperature variations that shouldn't exist, air pressure changes that defied physics. "This is impossible," she muttered, staring at her scanner. "It's reading like there's a fully operational industrial complex in there, but there's no power source, no fuel supply, no fuel supply." She stopped talking when she saw the drop forge. David Park's body was no longer recognizably human. He'd been completely integrated into the machinery, his consciousness now distributed throughout the metal framework. But the forge itself was working more efficiently than it ever had when it was new. Every strike of the hammer was perfectly timed, every piece of hot iron shaped with impossible precision. "My God," Carol whispered. "How is this possible?" "My grandmother used to tell stories," I said, "about workers who died in industrial accidents, whose souls got mixed up with the molten metal. I always thought they were just stories. Souls don't have mass," Carol said automatically. "They can't interact with physical matter. This has to be some kind of magnetic phenomenon, or maybe piezoelectric effects from the iron ore deposits." She was still trying to find a scientific explanation when Dr. Chen appeared at the entrance to the rolling mill. But Dr. Chen had changed even more in the short time I'd been away. Her transformation was nearly complete now. Skin like burnished steel, eyes that glowed with the heat of the forge, movements that matched the rhythm of the machinery around her. "Carol Steelwright," she said, and somehow she knew Carol's name without being introduced. "We've been expecting you. The quality control systems need proper calibration." Carol raised her instruments toward Dr. Chen, trying to get readings on whatever process was transforming her. But the moment her scanner locked onto Dr. Chen's biosignature, something in the machinery responded. The nearest steam hammer began moving toward us, its massive weight poised to crush anything that got in its way. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Carol's arm. We dodged between pieces of moving equipment, the entire foundry coming alive around us. But this wasn't random violence. It was purposeful, coordinated, like the machinery was trying to capture us rather than kill us. The workers' spirits wanted us alive so they could add us to their eternal production line. As we ran, I started to understand the full scope of what had happened here. The Cherokee Ironworks hadn't been abandoned in the 1,920 seconds. It had been sealed off after a series of accidents that killed dozens of workers in a single week. But instead of properly investigating those deaths, the company had just walked away, leaving the workers' bodies buried in the rubble and their spirits trapped in the iron they'd died working with. For 60 years, those spirits had been trying to complete their final work orders, but they couldn't do it alone. They needed living supervisors, living technicians, living safety inspectors to help them finish what they'd started. And anyone with industrial experience who came too close to the site would be absorbed into their workforce. We made it to the main administration building, an older structure that seemed less affected by the supernatural activity. Inside, Carol set up her equipment while I tried to figure out our options. We could try to run for it, but the spirits seemed able to control every piece of metal in the complex, including our truck. We could try to radio for help, but our communications were still being jammed. There has to be a way to stop this, Carol said, studying her readings. Some kind of electromagnetic pulse, or maybe a way to disrupt whatever energy source is powering the manifestation. It's not electromagnetic, I said. It's grief. It's 60 years of unfinished business and workers who died before their time. That's when I realized what my grandmother's stories had really been trying to tell me. The iron spirits weren't evil. They were just trying to do their jobs. They'd been killed in accidents caused by unsafe working conditions, inadequate safety protocols, corporate negligence. All they wanted was to complete their work in a way that honored their sacrifice. What if we don't try to stop them? I said. What if we help them finish? Carol looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Help them? Marcus, they're trying to turn us into metal sculptures. No, I said, understanding finally dawning. They're trying to make us supervisors. They need someone who understands proper safety protocols to help them complete their work without anyone else getting hurt. It was a crazy idea, but it was the only one that made sense of what I'd seen. The spirits weren't trying to harm us, they were trying to recruit us. And if we could figure out what work they needed to finish, maybe we could find a way to help them do it safely. The sound of approaching machinery told us our time was up. Dr. Chen and her transformed team were coming for us, and this time they weren't taking no for an answer. I made a decision that went against every piece of safety training I'd ever received. Instead of running from Dr. Chen and her team, I walked out to meet them. You want proper safety supervision? I called out over the noise of the machinery. Then, let's do this right. Show me what work needs to be completed. Dr. Chen's metal-transformed face showed something that might have been relief. The machinery around us slowed to a more manageable pace, and for the first time since I'd arrived, the cacophony organized itself into something that sounded like actual productive work. What they showed me was heartbreaking. In their final days of operation, the Cherokee Iron Works had been rushing to complete a major order for railroad components. The pressure to meet deadlines had led to cutting corners on safety, which led to the accidents that killed so many workers. Their spirits had been trying for 60 years to complete that order the right way, with proper safety protocols, adequate rest periods, and respect for the human cost of industrial production. Working with Carol, we spent the next several hours helping coordinate the supernatural workforce. I called out safety procedures while Carol monitored for hazardous conditions. The spirits responded eagerly to proper supervision, their work becoming more efficient and organized than it had been in decades. As the final railroad components took shape in the spectral forges, something remarkable happened. The workers' faces, barely visible in the metal surfaces around us, began to show peace instead of desperate urgency. Their voices, which had been calling out in panic and confusion, settled into the satisfied sounds of a job well done. Dr. Chen approached me as the last piece of iron was shaped and cooled. Her transformation was reversing itself, the metallic sheen fading from her skin, the glow leaving her eyes. "Thank you," she said in her own voice. They just wanted to finish their work with dignity. One by one, the spirits of the Cherokee Ironworks completed their final tasks and moved on. The machinery slowed, then stopped, then finally fell silent. The electromagnetic interference faded, and Carol's equipment began registering normal readings again. Dr. Chen's team recovered fully, though they retained strange memories of working as part of the machinery. David Park needed medical attention for his injuries, but he was alive and whole. The fusion with the drop forge had been as much spiritual as physical. In my final report, I recommended that the Cherokee Ironworks be designated as a memorial site rather than just sealed off. The workers who died there deserved recognition for their sacrifice, and their families deserved to know that their loved ones had finally been able to rest. But I also made sure that proper warning signs were posted and that access to the site remained strictly controlled. Because there are other abandoned industrial sites throughout these mountains, and I've started hearing reports of machinery operating where no machinery should be able to run. Some kinds of work, it seems, transcend death itself. And sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to help them finish what they started. Safely this time, with proper supervision and respect for human life. My name is Marcus Ironbound, and I've learned that my father's death wasn't an ending, but a beginning. There are spirits trapped in iron and steel all across this country, workers who died before their time and can't rest until their work is done right. And I've made it my mission to help them find that rest, one job site at a time. My name is Elizabeth Stonehart, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years. In all that time, I never believed grief could take physical form and hunt the living. I wish I still didn't. The Blue Ridge Parkway in North Carolina is beautiful, but Widow's Peak has always felt different. It's this rocky overlook that juts out from the mountain like a broken finger pointing at the sky. The locals named it after the Civil War, widows who threw themselves off the cliffs when their husbands never came home. Even now, people leave flowers there. White roses mostly, sometimes baby's breath. They say it's for the widows who never rest. I should know. I almost joined them 3 years ago. My husband Jake died in a climbing accident when I was 33. One minute he was laughing and calling down to me. The next minute the rope went slack and he was gone. For months afterward, I'd drive up to Widow's Peak and sit on the stone barrier, looking down at those jagged rocks below. The wind would whisper through the pines, and sometimes I swear I could hear voices calling my name. But that's grief for you. It plays tricks on your mind. That's why I got into crisis intervention. After Jake died, I learned everything I could about suicide prevention and grief counseling. I figured if I could help other people through their darkest moments, maybe I could make sense of my own. The Park Service was happy to have someone with my training, especially for a place like Widow's Peak. The overlook sits at the end of a winding road that takes 20 minutes to climb. There's nowhere to go but up or down, and cell phone service cuts out about halfway. When someone drives up there with bad intentions, they want to be alone. That's when I get the call. Dr. Thomas Comfortwise is the park psychologist who usually works with me. He's this gentle man with gray hair and kind eyes who talks people down better than anyone I've ever seen. We make a good team. He handles the talking, I handle the safety protocols. In 3 years, we've never lost anyone. Until this week. It started on Monday when we got 3 separate calls about people in distress at Widow's Peak. 3 different women, all widows, all in their 20s and 30s. That's unusual. Usually we get maybe 1 call a month, and it's typically men in their 40s having midlife crises. But these women all told the same story. They said they heard voices calling to them. Women's voices, sad and longing, coming from the mountain itself. They said the voices knew their names, knew about their husbands, knew exactly what to say to make the pain feel unbearable. Dr. Comfortwise and I managed to talk them all back from the edge. But something felt wrong. Really wrong. They all had this glazed look in their eyes, like they were listening to something we couldn't hear. And when we asked them to describe the voices, they got this faraway expression and said the same thing. They sound like they're crying. By Wednesday, we'd had 5 more calls. All young widows. All hearing voices. That's when I started to suspect we weren't dealing with ordinary grief anymore. The thing about Widow's Peak is that it's always been a sad place. Even on sunny days, there's this heaviness in the air, like the mountain itself is holding its breath. The mist never quite clears from the valleys below, and the wind always sounds like sighing. People feel it the moment they step out of their cars. I used to think it was just the history of the place. When you know that dozens of heartbroken women have jumped from these cliffs over the past 150 years, it changes how you see the rocks and trees. But lately, I've been wondering if history can leave deeper marks than we realize. On Thursday morning, I decided to drive up to Widow's Peak alone, before my shift started. I told myself I wanted to check the safety barriers and look for anything unusual. But really, I just needed to see the place with fresh eyes. The parking area was empty except for my truck. I walked to the overlook and stood where the stone barrier meets the cliff edge. The valley spread out below me, green and misty and beautiful. Birds sang in the trees behind me. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Then I heard it, a woman crying, soft and heartbroken, coming from somewhere down the mountainside. I leaned over the barrier and looked down the rocky slope, but I couldn't see anyone. The crying continued, rising and falling like wind through leaves. It was the saddest sound I'd ever heard, the kind of grief that comes from losing everything that ever mattered. "Hello?" I called out. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" The crying stopped immediately, like someone had flipped a switch. I stood there for 10 minutes, listening, but the mountain had gone completely silent. Even the birds had stopped singing. That's when I knew we were dealing with something beyond normal grief counseling. I drove back down the mountain with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. 13 years as a ranger, and I'd never experienced anything I couldn't explain. I deal with facts, weather patterns, wildlife behavior, human psychology. But facts don't account for disembodied crying that stops when you try to help. I found Dr. Comfortwise in his office at the visitor center, reading through incident reports. His gray hair was messier than usual, and he had that tired look he gets when he's worried about something. "Elizabeth," he said when I knocked on his doorframe, "I was hoping you'd stop by. We need to talk about these recent calls." I sat down across from his desk. "I just came from Widow's Peak, Tom." I heard crying coming from the mountainside, but when I looked, there was nobody there. He set down his papers and studied my face. "You're sure it wasn't wind or animals?" "I've been hiking these mountains for 20 years. I know what wind sounds like." This was a woman crying. I leaned forward. The same kind of crying those widows described. Dr. Comfortwise opened a file folder and spread out several forms. "I've been analyzing the pattern of our recent calls. Look at this." The incident reports all had similar details. Young women, recently widowed, drawn to Widow's Peak by voices they couldn't ignore. But there was something else. They'd all lost their husbands in different ways. Car accidents, illness, one military casualty. Nothing connecting them except their grief. "They're not copycat cases, Doctor," Comfortwise said. "These women don't know each other. They live in different towns, different counties, but they all describe hearing the same voices." "What kind of voices?" "Women calling to them by name, telling them they understand their pain, promising that the hurt will end if they just take one step forward." He looked up at me. "Elizabeth, in 30 years of psychology, I've never seen anything like this." That afternoon, we got another call. A 28-year-old woman named Sarah, whose husband had died in a motorcycle accident 2 months ago. She was calling from Widow's Peak, and she sounded different from the others. Calmer, almost peaceful. "They're here with me now," she said when I answered my radio. "They understand what I'm going through. They lost their husbands, too." "Sarah, I'm Ranger Stoneheart. I talked to you yesterday, remember? You drove down the mountain and said you felt better. That was before I knew they were real." Her voice had this dreamy quality, like she was talking in her sleep. "They showed me where their husbands are buried. Down in the valley, in graves, nobody tends anymore." Dr. Comfortwise grabbed my arm. "Keep her talking. We're 20 minutes out." "Sarah, who's there with you?" "Can you describe them?" "There's Margaret, who lost her husband at Bull Run, and Catherine, who never got word about Gettysburg, and Emily, whose husband died of fever in a prison camp." She paused. "They've been waiting here for so long, Elizabeth, waiting for their men to come home. Sarah, those women died over 100 years ago." "I know, but grief doesn't die, does it? It just keeps growing, year after year, until it becomes something else entirely." I heard wind howling through the phone, but when I looked out the visitor center window, the trees weren't even moving. "Sarah, listen to me. Whatever you're seeing isn't real. You're experiencing a grief hallucination brought on by stress and trauma. Dr. Comfortwise and I are coming to help you." "Help me what? Keep living with this pain forever?" Her voice was getting fainter, like she was moving away from her phone. "They showed me the truth, Elizabeth. Some losses are too big to survive. Some grief is too deep to heal. That's not true. I know, because I've been where you are. I lost my husband 3 years ago, and I wanted to die too. But the pain does get smaller. It never goes away completely, but it gets manageable. You don't understand. They explained it to me. The widows who jumped didn't die. They joined something larger. A family of women who understand loss so complete, it changes the shape of your soul. The line went quiet except for that impossible wind. Sarah? Sarah, are you there? Dr. Comfortwise was already heading for the door, his medical bag in hand. We jumped in my truck and drove up the winding road faster than we should have, my radio crackling with static. When we reached the parking area, Sarah's car was there, driver's door hanging open, keys still in the ignition. Her purse sat on the passenger seat, cell phone on top, still connected to our call. We ran to the overlook and found her standing at the stone barrier, staring down into the mist-filled valley. She wasn't alone. There were women with her. Translucent figures in long dresses and black mourning veils, standing along the cliff edge like a receiving line. They flickered in and out of sight, becoming solid for a moment before fading back to smoke and shadow. Dr. Comfortwise stopped so suddenly I almost ran into him. "Dear God," he whispered. The ghostly women turned to look at us, and their faces were the most heartbroken things I'd ever seen. Hollow eyes that had cried every tear they had. Mouths open in silent wails of grief that had lasted more than a century. Sarah turned too, and her face looked exactly like theirs. "I'm going to join them," she said, and her voice echoed with the sound of all those other women speaking at once. "I'm going to help them wait." She stepped up onto the stone barrier. That's when I realized we weren't dealing with ordinary ghosts. We were dealing with grief so powerful it had become a living thing, feeding on sorrow and growing stronger with each new widow who joined its endless vigil. And it wanted to recruit me too. "Sarah, stop!" I lunged forward, but Dr. Comfortwise caught my arm. "Don't get too close," he whispered. "They're trying to pull her in." The ghostly women were reaching out to Sarah with translucent hands, and where they touched her, her skin began to fade. She was becoming like them, piece by piece, transparent and lost to everything except grief. "I can feel their husbands calling," Sarah said, her voice growing distant. "From the battlefield, from the hospitals, from the graves nobody visits. They're still waiting for their wives to join them. Sarah, your husband wouldn't want this for you." I kept my voice steady, using every crisis intervention technique I knew. "Think about what he loved about you. Think about the life he wanted you to live." For a moment, she hesitated. The ghostly women hissed like wind through dead leaves, and their grip on her loosened. But then one of them, a tall woman in a tattered wedding dress, leaned close to Sarah's ear. I couldn't hear what she whispered, but Sarah's face crumpled with fresh pain. "He's calling my name," she sobbed. "David is calling for me. They showed me where he is." She stepped toward the edge. I broke free from Dr. Comfortwise's grip and tackled her, pulling her back from the barrier. The moment I touched her, a wave of grief hit me like a physical blow. Not my grief for Jake, but something older and deeper. The accumulated sorrow of every woman who'd ever lost everything that mattered. For a second, I saw what Sarah saw. A valley full of graves, and ghostly men in uniform standing among the headstones, calling out names and voices thick with longing. I saw Jake too, standing at the edge of the cemetery in his climbing gear, reaching out to me with a smile that broke my heart all over again. "Elizabeth," he said, and his voice was exactly like I remembered. "I've been waiting for you." The pull was incredible. Every part of me wanted to let go, to run to him, to end the 3 years of missing him that felt like a wound that would never heal. But then I remembered something Dr. Comfortwise had taught me. Grief lies. It tells you the pain will last forever. It tells you there's no point in going on. It tells you that love means suffering, when really, love means living. I dragged Sarah away from the cliff edge and shook her hard. "Look at me. Look at my eyes, not at them." She blinked, and for a moment her face cleared. "Elizabeth, what's happening to me?" "You're being influenced by something that feeds on grief. Something that wants to trap you in your worst moment forever." I helped her stand. "We need to get you away from here." The ghostly women shrieked, a sound like wind tearing through broken glass. They moved toward us, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Frost formed on the stone barrier, and our breath came out in visible puffs. Dr. Comfortwise stepped between us and the ghosts. "You have no right to her," he said firmly. "Grief is meant to heal, not to consume." The woman in the wedding dress laughed. A sound like crying played backward. "Heal?" she said, and her voice came from everywhere at once. "We have been grieving for 160 years. There is no healing from love cut short by war and death and loss." There is, Dr. Comfortwise said, but you have to choose it. You have to stop feeding on your pain and learn to remember love without drowning in it. Easy words from a man who has never lost everything. The ghost woman's form solidified, and I could see the details of her face clearly. Young, beautiful, and utterly destroyed by sorrow. I am Margaret Whitmore. I married my beloved James 3 days before he left for Bull Run. I waited for him for 2 years before I learned he died in the first charge. Tell me, doctor, what healing exists for a love that lasted only 3 days but was meant to last a lifetime? Dr. Comfortwise's face softened. The healing comes from honoring that love without letting it become a prison. James wouldn't want you trapped here, drowning in grief for eternity. How would you know what James wanted? Margaret's form flickered with rage. You didn't see him die alone on a battlefield, calling my name. You didn't feel his soul crying out for comfort that never came. She gestured to the other ghostly women. We all felt them die. We felt their fear, their pain, their desperate love reaching across the distance to find us. And when we couldn't save them, when we couldn't even say goodbye, the grief became bigger than death itself. I was still holding Sarah, feeling her struggle against my grip as the ghosts called to her. But I was starting to understand what we were dealing with. You're not just ghosts, I said. You're trauma. You're the moment when grief becomes so big it stops being an emotion and starts being a force of nature. Margaret turned her hollow gaze on me. Yes. And you know this feeling, don't you, Elizabeth? You know what it's like to lose the other half of your soul. Images flashed through my mind. Jake falling, the funeral, the endless nights when I forgot he was gone and reached for him in bed. The grief tried to pull me under again, but I held on to what I'd learned in therapy. I know grief, I said, but I also know that Jake loved me too much to want me trapped in the worst moment of our story. Lies, hissed another ghost, this one wearing a nurse's uniform from the Civil War era. I am Catherine Morris. I tended wounded soldiers and watched good men die in agony, calling for wives who would never see them again. Love doesn't heal trauma, child. Love makes trauma unbearable. The ghosts pressed closer, and I felt their collective grief like a weight pressing down on my chest. Sarah was getting heavier in my arms, becoming translucent around the edges. We have to go, Dr. Comfortwise said urgently. They're too strong here. This is their anchor point. But as we tried to back toward the parking area, more ghosts appeared between us and the cars. Not just Civil War widows now, but women from every era, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, modern widows in business suits and sundresses, all with the same hollow eyes and reaching hands. You see? Margaret laughed. Grief is eternal. Every generation learns the same lesson, that some losses are too great for the human heart to bear. Join us, Elizabeth. Help us wait for the men who will never come home. The parking area filled with ghostly figures, and I realized we were trapped. But more than that, I realized these weren't just random spirits. They were connected, all part of the same web of grief that had been growing for over a century. Widow's Peak wasn't haunted. It was infected. Infected with grief so concentrated it had become a living thing, spreading from one broken heart to the next. And it was trying to make me its newest host. They're not trying to hurt us, I said suddenly, the realization hitting me like a thunderbolt. They're trying to save us. Dr. Comfortwise looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but I was starting to understand. Look at them, I continued, studying the ghostly women surrounding us. They're not angry or evil. They're trying to help us avoid the pain they couldn't escape. Margaret's translucent form wavered. Of course we want to help. We want to spare you the agony of living with a broken heart. But that's not help, I said gently, still holding Sarah steady. That's just stopping the clock at the worst moment and staying there forever. I looked around at all the ghostly faces, young women, old women, all frozen in their deepest grief. You're trying to save us from healing because you never learned how to heal yourselves. There is no healing from this, Catherine wailed. Only endless waiting and endless pain. No, said Dr. Comfortwise, understanding flooding his voice. Elizabeth's right. You've been stuck in the acute phase of grief for over a century. You never moved through it to acceptance. Acceptance? Margaret's laugh was bitter. Accept that James died in mud and blood, thinking I would forget him? Accept that our 3 days of marriage meant nothing? Accept that those 3 days were beautiful and real and worth celebrating, even though they ended, I said. Accept that loving James changed you in ways that don't disappear just because he did. Sarah stirred in my arms. Elizabeth? I can think clearly again. What's happening? You're learning the difference between grieving and drowning, I told her. These women have been drowning for so long they forgot there was any other way to love someone who's gone. The ghosts pressed closer, their grief washing over us in waves. But instead of fighting it, I let myself feel it fully. The crushing weight of loss, the desperate longing, the fear that forgetting the pain meant forgetting the love. I felt this too, I told them. After Jake died, I thought staying miserable was the only way to prove I'd really loved him. I thought healing meant betrayal. Didn't it? Whispered a young woman in a 1,940 seconds dress. If the pain goes away, doesn't that mean they didn't matter? No, it means they mattered so much that they changed us forever. The love doesn't die when the pain gets manageable. It just becomes something we can carry instead of something that carries us away. Dr. Comfortwise stepped forward. In my 30 years of grief counseling, I've learned that the goal isn't to get over loss. It's to learn to live alongside it, to build a life that honors both the love you had and the life you still have to live. But how? Margaret's voice was smaller now, less certain. How do we stop waiting for them to come home? By understanding that they never really left. I said, Jake isn't waiting for me in some cemetery. He's in every mountain I climb, every person I help, every time I choose to keep living the life he would have wanted me to live. The ghostly women flickered, their forms becoming less solid. Some of them looked confused, like they were waking up from a very long dream. We could. Remember without drowning? Asked Catherine tentatively. Yes, Dr. Comfortwise said. Grief isn't supposed to be a permanent prison. It's supposed to be a bridge between the love you had and the love you can still give to the world. Sarah stood up straighter, her body becoming solid again. David wouldn't want me to stop living. He'd want me to live enough for both of us. One by one, the ghosts began to fade. Not disappearing, but becoming lighter, less anchored to their pain. I saw understanding dawn on their faces as they realized they'd been trapped not by death, but by their own refusal to let grief change into something bearable. But Margaret remained solid, her wedding dress rippling in an unfelt wind. It's too late for us, she said sadly. We've been in this place too long. We don't remember how to be anything but heartbroken. It's never too late, I said, but you have to choose it. You have to choose to honor James by being more than just his widow. For a long moment, Margaret stood at the cliff edge, looking down into the misty valley. Then she turned back to me. Will you help us remember? I took a deep breath. I'll try. But you have to stop trying to recruit new widows. You have to stop spreading the infection of endless grief. We thought we were helping, she whispered. I know, but real help means teaching people to swim, not drowning with them. Margaret nodded slowly, and I felt something shift in the air around Widow's Peak. The oppressive weight of accumulated sorrow began to lift, replaced by something gentler but no less profound. How do we begin? She asked. I looked around at the remaining ghostly women, all watching me with hope instead of desperation for the first time in over a century. We begin with the truth, I said. Your husbands loved you. They wouldn't want you trapped here. And loving them doesn't require suffering forever. The sun broke through the mist for the first time in years, and Widow's Peak felt like a different place entirely. 6 months later, I stand at Widow's Peak Overlook with a small group of people who've lost spouses to war, accidents, and illness. It's become an unofficial grief counseling retreat, a place where people learn the difference between honoring love and being imprisoned by it. The ghostly widows are still here, but they're different now. Instead of trying to drag the living into endless sorrow, they help people process their grief in healthy ways. Margaret appears to young widows who are drowning in despair, not to recruit them, but to show them that love can survive without pain being permanent. Dr. Comfortwise has documented the whole thing, though he keeps the supernatural elements out of his official reports. He says the important thing isn't whether people believe in ghosts, but whether they believe in the possibility of healing. Sarah comes to our monthly gatherings. She started a scholarship fund in her husband's name and is taking classes to become a grief counselor herself. She says David would be proud that his death led to something that helps other people live. The suicide rate at Widow's Peak has dropped to 0. Word has spread quietly through the community that it's become a place of healing instead of a place of ending. People still leave flowers, But now they're celebrating love instead of mourning its absence. I've changed too. I still miss Jake every day, but the missing has become gentle instead of crushing. I can think about our good times without drowning in our last moment. I can love him without hating my life after him. Margaret visits me sometimes, usually when I'm working late at the visitor center. She tells me about the other ghostly widows learning to let go, about Civil War soldiers finally able to rest because their wives stopped trying to die to reach them. We thought love meant suffering, she told me last week. We forgot that love means wanting the best for someone, even when they're gone. The strange thing is, I've started seeing other supernatural activity in the park. Not malevolent stuff, just spirits who got stuck in trauma and forgot how to move forward. A hiker who died in a storm and kept trying to save other hikers from the same fate, even though his interference made things worse. A ranger from the 1952nd who couldn't accept retirement and kept trying to do his rounds decades after his death. It's like Widow's Peak was an anchor point for all kinds of unresolved trauma, and once we cleared the grief infection, other stuck souls started finding their way to healing too. Dr. Comfortwise thinks we've stumbled onto something important about how trauma can become a self-perpetuating force, spreading from person to person across generations until someone breaks the cycle. He's been consulting with other parks that have similar problems, places where tragedy created a kind of emotional quicksand that trapped both the living and the dead. I don't know if we're dealing with real ghosts or just the psychological imprint of intense emotions, and honestly, I don't think it matters. What matters is that Widow's Peak has become a place where people learn that love is stronger than grief, even when grief feels like the most powerful force in the universe. Sometimes, late in the evening when I'm closing up the visitor center, I hear the sound of women talking softly on the mountain. But it's different now. Instead of endless crying, it's the murmur of people sharing stories, offering comfort, teaching each other that healing is possible. The widows are still there, but they're no longer mourning, they're remembering. And sometimes, in the space between sunset and dark, I swear I can hear them laughing.